Welcome, dear listener. Before we begin, please make sure your volume is just low enough to feel like a whisper. Lie down, close your eyes, let the world fall away for a while. This is your time to rest, to drift, to simply be. You're about to hear the very first story in our quiet journey through time, a series called Boring History for Sleep. If you find comfort in these slow, sleepy tales, please consider liking this video and subscribing so you'll always have something gentle waiting for you when the night falls again. Now let's begin with the lost traditions of indigenous Siberian peoples. Far away in the frozen north, beyond the last train tracks, and deeper still than the snowy edges of maps, lies the vast region known as Siberia. A land not of cities and noise, but of silence, slow winds, and ancient forests that stretch for miles with no end in sight. The winters there are long, cold, and quiet. And the people who once called this land home knew how to live within that quiet, how to listen to it, and how to find meaning in its stillness. Tonight, we will begin our journey by exploring the forgotten rhythms of life among the indigenous peoples of Siberia, tribes whose traditions were once passed down by firelight in whispers, not recorded in books or echoed through crowded museums. Among the most prominent of these peoples were the Evenki, the Chukchi, the Nenets, the Yukagir, and many others, each with their own language, beliefs, and way of understanding the land. But over time, many of their stories faded, like footprints disappearing under fresh snow. And so tonight, we walk slowly, carefully, back in time. The Evenki people, once called Tungus by outsiders, were known for their deep relationship with the reindeer. These gentle animals were not just transport or food, they were considered kin. A reindeer could carry a man across frozen tundra for days, guide him through whiteout storms, or simply wait patiently beside his tent, called a chum, as the wind howled outside. The Evenki believed that each animal had a spirit, and to hunt without respect was to disturb the balance of nature. They wore furs not just for warmth, but as a form of thanks, decorated with small bone carvings, beads, and sometimes teeth, each one telling a quiet story. Further east, the Chukchi lived on the edge of the sea. Their lives were shaped by whales, walruses, and the icy waters of the Arctic. They built their homes from driftwood and animal skins, forming rounded structures that held in heat and held out wind. Their dances mimicked the movements of animals, the wide flapping of a bird, the heavy tread of a bear, the flick of a fish's tail. They carved from ivory, etched from memory, and sang songs with no instruments, only voices and the steady beat of a small drum. Their shamans, called Kelet, were said to speak with spirits, heal the sick, and travel through dream worlds during long winter nights. These beliefs were not written. They were lived in silence, in gesture, in ritual. The Nenets, another nomadic group, moved with the reindeer across the Yamal Peninsula. They dressed in layered reindeer hides, soft and warm, sewn with sinew, and wrapped tightly against the wind. Their sleds, long and narrow, glided across snow pulled by teams of strong animals. The Nenets followed a cycle as old as memory, migrating hundreds of miles each year between summer and winter pastures. Along the way, they would pause, set up their tents, and tell stories to their children about the sky gods and the spirits of the forest. These stories were not grand epics, but simple tales: a lost hunter guided home by a glowing fox, a brave woman who walked into the storm to save her sister, a child who sang so beautifully the stars came closer to listen. And then there were the Yukagir, whose language now teeters on the edge of extinction. Only a handful of people still speak it today, but centuries ago, their songs echoed across the low valleys of northeastern Siberia. The Yukagir believed the soul could fly in sleep, that dreams were journeys, and that fire was sacred. To them, fire was more than warmth. It was a protector, a listener, a witness. Before eating, they would offer the first bite to the flames, believing the fire would carry the scent to the ancestors. Every object, they believed, had a spirit: a tree, a stone, a cup of water. And to live well was to live gently among those spirits, never disturbing them, never forgetting they were there. The stories of these peoples do not begin with empires or kings. They do not involve great battles or rising cities. They begin with silence, with footsteps on snow, with smoke curling from a tent at dawn. They speak of patience, of listening to the land, of trusting the wind, of waiting for the river to thaw. They teach us that history can be slow, and that not all knowledge is loud. Some of it is quiet, like a whisper shared between two elders in the dark. Some of it is practical: how to dry fish in winter, how to sew boots without thread, how to read the tracks of a fox in fresh powder. But all of it is meaningful. Over time, many of these practices faded. Pressures from the outside world, new governments, new religions, new schools, pushed the old ways aside. Children were sent far from home to boarding schools where they were told not to speak their language. Tents were replaced by concrete. The soft language of snow and stars was drowned out by factory bells and city horns. But still, in some quiet corners, the old stories remain, in lullabies, in carvings, in the way a grandmother wraps a child in fur, just like her mother once wrapped her. And so we begin here, in Siberia, with a people who knew how to sleep under the stars, how to live with the wind, and how to tell stories that didn't need paper or pens. Only time, memory, and quiet. As you rest tonight, remember that the world is full of forgotten knowledge, not lost, just quiet, waiting for someone like you to listen. To understand the rhythms of life in indigenous Siberia is to step outside the modern clock. There were no alarms, no fixed hours for meals or meetings. Instead, life moved with the sun, with the migration of animals, and with the hush of snow falling against tent walls. The people here did not ask, "What time is it?" but rather, "What season are we in?" or, "Has the moon begun to shift?" In the forests and tundra, this kind of knowledge was more useful than any wristwatch. The arrival of spring wasn't marked on a calendar. It was felt in the wet scent of thawing earth, the return of birdsong, or the soft cracking of river ice beneath one's boots. It was during these transitions between seasons that many rituals took place. Offerings were made to the spirits of land and sky, often by burying small carved figures in the snow or placing food beneath trees. These weren't grand ceremonies. There were no loud speeches or crowds, only the family, the fire, and a quiet gesture of thanks to the unseen. In many Siberian communities, the idea of home was not a building, but a circle of memory. A camp might shift locations several times each year, but the stories followed. Chums and yarangas, round tents made from animal hides and supported by wooden poles, were taken down, packed, and rebuilt wherever the herds led. The fire was always at the center, not just for warmth, but as a symbol of life. Children learned early on not to step over the fire pit or drop waste near it. It was a place of respect. Elders told stories beside it, sometimes in long, winding tones that lulled listeners to sleep before the tale's end. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were survival guides in disguise. One tale might teach what to do if you get lost in the forest. Another might explain how to calm a frightened reindeer. Some were warnings wrapped in myth about wandering too far from camp, or disrespecting a spirit that lived in a rock or river. Among the Khanty and Mansi peoples, who lived along the Ob River and deep in the taiga forests, there was a strong tradition of oral mapping. Without paper or compasses, they remembered the land through song. These songlines, as some researchers called them, were lyrical descriptions of the landscape, where a particular hill sloped, where a stream bent, where the berries grew in summer. A child might be taught a walking song, not for music, but to find their way. Imagine walking for days, alone, in snow-covered woods, and knowing each turn because the next line of a song told you to. This was their GPS, gentle, poetic, passed from voice to ear, generation to generation. Even daily tasks carried quiet meaning. In many tribes, women were the keepers of sewing, cooking, and gathering traditions. But their knowledge went beyond practical chores. They knew which plants soothed burns, which mushrooms could be eaten raw, and which ones should be avoided. They chewed reindeer sinew to soften it into thread. They stitched boots called torbasa that could last for years through snow and mud. A good pair of boots wasn't just warm. It told others that you came from a strong family. Elders passed down not just skills but rhythms. How to stir the fish soup in slow figure eights, how to fold a blanket so the spirits wouldn't be offended, how to sing a baby to sleep with a lullaby that ended in a hush, not a word. The concept of the soul was also central. For many Siberian peoples, the soul was not one thing, but many. A person might have a soul in the breath, another in the shadow, and one that wandered during dreams. Losing a soul meant falling ill. Recovering it might require a shaman's journey, where the healer would enter a trance, guided by drumbeats, and seek the lost part of the person in the spirit world. These ceremonies were rarely dramatic. More often, they were quiet. The tent darkened, the drumbeat steady like a slow heartbeat. The people gathered close, eyes closed, as if listening together could help bring the soul back. Afterward, there was no applause, only the slow return of breath, a sip of hot broth, and the soft voice of the shaman saying, "It is done." Siberia was not empty. It was full of subtle things. The sound of birds returning in the spring, the change in fur thickness of animals before winter, the angle of light on a rock that meant snow would come soon. These were signs, small and quiet, but loud to those who knew how to read them. And the people did not rush. They were not trying to finish quickly. They let time pass like the river, slow and steady. When the wind howled, they waited. When the sun stayed low in the sky, they burned more firewood, shared more stories, and slept longer. Colonization brought disruptions. The arrival of Russian fur traders, Orthodox missionaries, and Soviet bureaucrats changed everything. New words were introduced. New rules, new punishments. Children were renamed. Old gods were forbidden. But even in silence, the old ways found places to hide. A charm sewn into a coat. A lullaby whispered in secret. A ritual done alone, in the woods, under the moon. The land remembered. And so did some of the people. Today, many of their descendants live in towns, use cell phones, and speak Russian at school. But they also remember the taste of frozen fish dipped in salt, the sound of snow pressing against tent walls, the way their grandmother's hands moved when telling stories by the fire. As you drift tonight, remember this. History is not always written in books or carved in stone. Sometimes it is stitched into boots, sung in a forgotten language, carried in the breath of a grandmother's story. Not all knowledge is meant to impress. Some is simply meant to keep you warm, fed, and at peace with the world around you. And those are the stories most worth remembering. As the snow settled in thick blankets across the Siberian tundra, and the wind carried whispers through endless pines, the rhythm of daily life among the indigenous peoples slowed into something deeper than rest. It became reflection. In the long, dark months, when the sun barely rose above the horizon and twilight seemed to stretch for days, families gathered inside their tents or wooden cabins, surrounded by furs and soft firelight, and turned inward. This season of cold was not feared but accepted, even welcomed, as a time to pause, to mend, and to remember. Children played with carved wooden animals shaped like reindeer or wolves, passing the time with quiet games. Elders leaned back, their faces illuminated by orange flickers, retelling stories of ancestors who once crossed frozen rivers barefoot or spoke with birds. One such tradition, found among the Nganasan people of the Taimyr Peninsula, involved the belief that ancestors lived in the stars, watching over the living below. On clear nights, a child might be shown a bright cluster in the sky and told, "That is your great-grandmother. She watches when you are kind. She turns away when you lie." This wasn't superstition. It was a soft reminder of accountability, of living with integrity not just for oneself, but for all who came before. Within many of these indigenous groups, the natural world was not seen as separate from humanity, but as an extension of it. Mountains had moods, rivers had memories. A strong wind was not just weather, it was the breath of the land itself. If you spoke ill of the forest, you might get lost in it. If you harvested without thanking the earth, the next season might bring less. And so every act, even the smallest, was done with a kind of reverence. Before fishing, it was common to tap the water's surface and whisper a blessing. Before gathering berries, a small offering, perhaps a piece of bread or a few strands of hair, was left behind. These rituals were not loud nor dramatic. They were quiet, steady, and woven into daily life like the stitching on a warm coat. Among the Dolgan people, songs played an important role in shaping identity. A newborn might receive a birth song composed just for them, sung by a mother or grandmother during feeding or sleep. This song became a sort of musical name, its melody and rhythm unique to the child. As they grew older, that tune would be sung at important moments, when leaving home for the first time, during an illness, or in mourning. The song reminded them of who they were and where they belonged. Even when traveling far from their community, hearing that melody could bring peace. And so identity was not a fixed name on a paper document, but something fluid, passed through sound, memory, and breath. Language, too, carried depth beyond communication. Many of these indigenous Siberian tongues were polysynthetic, meaning that one word could hold the meaning of an entire sentence. A single term might describe not just a tree, but a tall spruce with soft snow on its branches, standing near a frozen river. This richness allowed for precise storytelling, where every detail mattered, and the world was not flattened into vague generalities but painted in specificity. Sadly, many of these languages are now endangered, but fragments survive, words spoken in lullabies, in prayers, in jokes that only grandparents remember. Linguists who work with the Chulem, the Selkup, or the Ket people often describe the process of documenting these tongues as more than translation. It is an act of listening to a rhythm that has been nearly lost. Among the indigenous belief systems, illness was rarely thought of as purely physical. It might be the result of broken relationships, with the spirit world, with family, or even with the land. To heal, one might drink herbal teas made from moss or pine bark, but also seek reconciliation. A wronged spirit might require apology. A forgotten ancestor might need honoring. A broken friendship might need mending. Shamans played a central role here, not as priests, but as mediators. They wore coats made of fur and bone, carried drums with skins stretched tight, and entered trance states by dancing or fasting or simply listening deeply. In these altered states, they would search for lost souls, plead with angry spirits, or find the unseen cause of a persistent cough or sudden sadness. These practices were not considered exotic or rare. They were everyday responses to the mystery of life. Everything had meaning, even dreams. A dream of a bird might signal a journey ahead. A dream of falling might warn of imbalance. But unlike dream dictionaries in modern bookstores, interpretations weren't fixed. They depended on the person, the time of year, the phase of the moon, and what was happening in the dreamer's waking life. In this way, dreams were not puzzles to solve, but conversations to continue, gently, over breakfast, or by the fire. As you breathe slowly tonight, remember that for many centuries, people lived without clocks, without walls, without noise, and yet they lived fully. They laughed, loved, raised children, sang to the stars, and whispered stories into the dark. Their knowledge wasn't written on paper, but carried in bodies. In the way one walks through snow, ties a fur hat, or looks up at the sky and waits for the wind to change. These are not lost traditions. They are just resting, like seeds beneath snow, waiting for quiet minds to awaken them once more. In the far corners of the Siberian wilderness, where the air remains crisp even in midsummer and the rivers run slow under wide skies, there existed a quiet understanding that the earth itself was alive. The indigenous peoples of this vast landscape did not speak of nature as an external force, but as a living relative, something to be listened to, respected, and never hurried. A stone was not merely hard ground underfoot, but a being that had witnessed centuries of passing lives. Trees, especially the larch and birch common in the taiga, were not seen as resources, but as old friends, silent, watchful, and full of memory. Before cutting one down, a person might place a hand on its trunk, speak a few gentle words, and wait for a sign of permission, perhaps a bird taking flight, a rustle of branches, or a quiet stillness that settled like approval. This was not ritual for show iwai. It was a matter of balance, of maintaining harmony with a world that was never silent. Among the Selkup, a river folk people who lived near the confluence of the Ob and Ket rivers, it was believed that every bend in the water had a guardian spirit. These spirits, neither wholly kind nor cruel, needed to be acknowledged. A traveler passing through unfamiliar territory might place a tuft of hair or a carved token on a rock near the shore, a silent gesture to ask for safe passage. If the river grew too loud, or its surface became choppy for no clear reason, it was a sign that something had been disturbed. In such cases, the travelers would pause, camp along the shore, and wait until the water calmed, never forcing their way through. Time for them moved at the pace of nature, not the other way around. In winter, when the land was buried beneath a deep white silence and the breath of animals curled like smoke in the cold air, communities turned inward and shared knowledge that was never written. Recipes for fish soup made with frozen pike and fermented milk, techniques for drying meat without fire, instructions for wrapping a baby so that it would sleep through the long night. These lessons were taught not in schools, but through watching and helping. An older sibling showing a younger one how to fold fur blankets. A grandmother murmuring softly while stitching together reindeer hide mittens. There were no tests, no grades, just the slow layering of skill, day after day, season after season. Among the Chukchi people, who lived on the windswept northeastern coasts, storytelling was both education and entertainment. A good storyteller was honored not for dramatic flair, but for calm voice, steady rhythm, and the ability to hold silence as part of the tale. These stories often involved animals who could speak, humans who could transform, and spirits who watched from behind clouds. But even fantastical tales were grounded in the practical. How to cross a thin ice sheet without breaking through, how to survive a snowstorm by digging into the snow and sleeping like a bear, how to treat frostbite with warm breath and patience. Children would fall asleep listening, not realizing they were being prepared for the realities of life. Shamans, too, played a central role in preserving balance. They were not isolated mystics, but members of the community who carried the weight of spiritual well-being. Their tools, a drum, a coat adorned with animal teeth, perhaps a pouch of herbs, were not signs of power, but of service. When illness struck, or misfortune lingered, or dreams became restless, it was the shaman who listened. Sometimes they would journey into trance, guided by rhythmic drumming, where they claimed to travel to other realms, the realm of the dead, the world of spirits, or the deep forest where answers hid in shadows. These journeys were not taken lightly. They required fasting, solitude, and often great emotional cost. But they were done because the community asked, and because the old ways said that health was never just a matter of the body, it was a matter of balance between worlds. In the spring, as the snow began to melt and the rivers swelled with cold, fast water, many tribes held ceremonies to greet the change. Not grand festivals, but quiet recognitions. A first fish caught was held aloft, then returned to the water. A fire was lit before dawn, and everyone sat silently as the smoke curled into the soft pink sky. These moments reminded the people that life was a cycle, not a line, but a wheel turning slowly with each season. Birth, growth, rest, decay, all part of one movement. And to resist that cycle was to bring disharmony. As modernization spread, first with fur traders, then missionaries, and eventually Soviet influence, many of these traditions were suppressed. Children were sent to boarding schools where they were punished for speaking their languages. Shamans were labeled as superstitious and their drums confiscated. Chums were replaced with concrete apartments, and reindeer herding was reorganized into state farms. But even under such pressure, the old ways bent without fully breaking. In whispers, in songs hummed while walking, in the way someone still leaves an offering of tea by a riverbank, they survive. Tonight, as you rest and breathe gently, remember that knowledge does not always need to be loud or official. Sometimes it is passed hand to hand, like a warm cup of broth on a cold morning. Sometimes it is carried in silence. And sometimes, like snow falling softly in the night, it is simply there, waiting to be felt, not heard. As the frost began to retreat and the frozen rivers of Siberia cracked open like slow-moving mirrors, life among the indigenous communities gradually stirred from its winter stillness. Spring in this vast, ancient land was not sudden or loud. It arrived in delicate stages, barely noticeable at first. A slight shift in the wind, a softening of the snow beneath the boots, a new bird song in the early morning silence. Among the Evenki, Nenets, and Khanty peoples, this time of year marked more than a change in weather. It was the quiet reawakening of the land, a moment to realign with the rhythms of the natural world. In these days, the people listened closely, not just with ears, but with memory. The melting ice might signal when to move the reindeer to fresh pastures, or when the fish would begin to stir in the deeper currents. For the skilled elder hunters, even the scent of the air carried meaning. These signs, passed down through generations, were as trusted as maps. The land spoke, and the people understood. Nomadic life resumed in gentle preparation. Tents were repaired using sinew and bark fiber. Sleds were checked and carefully oiled with animal fat. Tools, wrapped in leather all winter, were unwrapped and tested in silence. There were no countdowns or deadlines, only the pace of the land. Among the Dolgan people, children learned early how to watch without rushing. A young girl might sit for hours beside her grandfather as he mended a net, learning not by instruction, but by patience. A boy might be asked to sit near the fire and simply listen, first to the wind, then to the slow voice of his grandmother recounting a tale about a seal who turned into a boy, or a fox who tricked a greedy man and vanished into the mist. These stories, carried in low voices, were more than bedtime entertainment. They were moral anchors. They taught humility, generosity, and respect, not in abstract terms, but through vivid living metaphors that connected every lesson to the land. Spiritual beliefs continued to shape the way these communities understood change and time. The Yucca here, for instance, believed in a layered world, this one we walk in and others just beyond, filled with shadows, echoes, and spirits. During the spring thaw, it was thought that the veil between these worlds grew thinner. To step carelessly during these days, by entering a sacred grove without permission, or forgetting to greet the river spirit, was to risk imbalance. A sudden illness, a missing reindeer, or a string of strange dreams might be interpreted as a warning. In such times, a respected elder might take a walk alone at twilight, carrying no tools but a small pouch of salt, berries, or carved wood. These offerings were placed quietly at the edge of the forest, with a whispered apology or prayer, not for show, but for restoration. The act of healing, in Siberian tradition, was often quiet and long. A fever might be treated not just with warm broth, but with a special song sung at dawn. Sadness was not ignored but observed, understood as a weight that must be lifted slowly, often with the help of others. The communal fire was not just for warmth, but for listening. A person could speak to it, or simply sit near it and be noticed. Silence in these communities was rarely empty. It held presence, acknowledgement, and space. The act of being seen, without words, was itself a form of healing. Among the Chilim and Ket peoples, springtime brought renewed attention to the forest. Mushrooms, mosses, and the first edible plants began to appear, and entire families would go into the woods together, baskets in hand. Each plant was gathered with care, not greed. A good gatherer was one who left more than they took, who remembered which spots needed rest, and who spoke softly while picking so as not to startle the forest spirits. Back at camp, these harvests were dried or preserved in ancient ways, sun-drying on wood racks, fermenting in birch containers, or mixing with fat to create nutrient-dense pastes that could last through the next winter. Recipes were never written, but every hand seemed to know the right texture, the right scent, the exact moment when the mixture was done. Songs, too, changed with the seasons. Spring brought brighter melodies, still slow, but filled with a sense of gentle movement. Mothers hummed lullabies while walking with their babies strapped in soft reindeer hide cradles. Teenagers whispered love songs under the trees. Elders sang to the stars, their voices barely more than breath, sending gratitude for the survival of another winter. These songs were not accompanied by instruments. The voice was enough. Just as the snow melted quietly and rivers flowed without permission, the human voice was part of the land's own music, another current in a timeless stream. As you lie still tonight, think of this: that somewhere far from city lights, there are people who still walk through forests barefoot, who listen to trees before speaking, and who trust stories more than clocks. They know that wisdom is not rushed, that spring arrives on its own time, and that silence can be as full as any sound. Their traditions, like snow melting into river, continue on, not fast, not loud, but always flowing. Summer in the Siberian wilderness did not arrive with fanfare. It crept in gently, as if careful not to disturb the stillness of the land. The ice melted fully, the rivers ran deeper, and the sun lingered longer in the sky, stretching shadows across the mossy ground. In this brief season of warmth, the world felt more open. Birds returned, insects filled the air with soft buzzing, and reindeer herds moved steadily across the tundra, their hooves pressing gentle prints into the soft earth. Among the indigenous peoples, summer was a time of movement, of labor, of gathering and preparing. Not rushed, but continuous. There was no sense of urgency as in modern harvests, only the awareness that nature gave generously, but not endlessly, and each action had its moment. The Evenki people took to the forests, guiding their herds to fresh pastures while carrying their lives on sleds and pack animals. Their chums, conical tents made of birch poles and hide, were set up and taken down as the landscape changed. It was said that a skilled family could construct a home within an hour, each person knowing their role without being asked. Children helped carry water from nearby streams, watching carefully how adults built fires, hung meat to dry, and stitched new moccasins from soft leather. These were not chores. They were moments of learning. No one shouted instructions. Instead, tasks were shown through repetition, completed in silence, and corrected with a glance or a touch on the shoulder. Time was marked not by clocks, but by tasks completed and the position of the sun. In the north, where the Nenettes traveled with massive reindeer herds across the Yamal Peninsula, summer meant long migrations under pale, never-dark skies. The tundra was alive with wildflowers, and the reindeer grazed for hours without pause, building the strength they would need for the next winter. Families moved alongside the herd, traveling in a rhythm passed down through generations. Along the way, they stopped to fish in quiet lakes, to trade with other groups, and to share news. These exchanges were simple but meaningful. Handshakes, shared tea, and stories of weather, births, and lost animals. News moved slowly, like the land itself. No one rushed to speak. Conversations could take hours, drifting between memory and present, as if time itself had softened. Among the Conti and Mansi peoples, summer was also a time of ceremony. While most of their spiritual practices were deeply personal and performed within families, there were moments during the year when entire communities would gather in forest clearings or near sacred rivers to give thanks. Offerings were made, small carvings, food, strands of hair tied in birch bark, and songs were sung not to be heard, but to be felt. These ceremonies were not meant to impress. There were no grand altars or shining garments. Instead, people wore their oldest clothes, the ones passed down from relatives, stitched with thread made of reindeer sinew and decorated with patterns that held meaning only to those who knew. A circle might be formed, not in rigid rows, but in a natural gathering. A drumbeat might begin, not fast, not loud, just steady. And then a low voice would begin a chant. Others would join in when they felt ready. The ceremony might last an hour or the whole night. No one kept track. The purpose was not performance, but presence. Elsewhere, in the regions where the Chukchi lived near the sea, summer brought opportunities to fish and gather along the shores. Driftwood that had floated from distant lands was collected and shaped into tools. Walrus tusks were carved with care, sometimes becoming combs, sometimes small figurines with faces that reflected dreams or spirits seen during sleep. The sea was not feared but respected. It gave food but also demanded caution. Young people were taught to read the waves, not just their size but their sound, their shape, the stories they carried. A calm sea could shift without warning. A cloud on the horizon might mean a storm in 6 hours. These lessons were not written down. They were shared during long boat rides, in murmured phrases and gestures. "Look there," an elder might say, pointing to the way a gull circled. "The fish are deeper today." And that would be enough. Language during these months was minimal. There was no need for chatter. The land spoke in rustling leaves, in the crunch of moss underfoot, in the distant call of a loon. People listened. Rest came not through stillness, but through knowing one's place within the movement of things. A child who had walked all day gathering berries would fall asleep quickly, wrapped in furs, listening to the quiet talk of adults outside the tent. Dreams were said to be clearer in summer, and some believed they carried messages, not always important but never ignored. To dream of a white animal was a sign. To dream of a frozen lake during the warm season meant something was out of balance. Such dreams were shared in the morning, slowly, between sips of tea boiled with pine needles. And so the cycle of life continued. Summer was short, but it was enough. The earth provided. The people moved gently across it. No great monuments were built, no loud declarations made, but knowledge grew, held softly in the way one tied a knot, carved a spoon, or walked quietly through a field without disturbing the nesting birds. As you settle into sleep, remember that there is a kind of wisdom that does not rush, a way of living that requires no spotlight, no trophies, only attention and care. It waits for no applause. It endures like the slow rivers of Siberia, flowing not toward glory, but toward understanding. As autumn approached and the warmth of Siberia's brief summer slowly slipped away, the land began to shift once again, returning to its colder rhythm with quiet determination. The air turned sharper, the skies deepened to a darker blue, and the trees, especially the scattered birch and larch, began to release their golden leaves like gentle confessions whispered to the earth. Among the indigenous peoples, autumn was not a time of fading, but of focus, a season where preparation was everything, and every small task carried significance. It was the time of gathering roots and late berries, of drying fish and smoking meat, of sewing thicker clothing and tightening the seams of tents. Among the Evenki, the coming cold was met with quiet resolve. The people moved deliberately, not rushing, but always mindful of what winter would demand. Reindeer were inspected for strength. Sleds were reinforced. Firewood was stacked with precision, not just for warmth, but for balance. A well-built woodpile was a sign of a well-ordered life. Children helped gather moss to line the inside of tents and learned how to set traps, not to hunt for sport, but to ensure the family would have enough when snow made travel difficult. These skills were not introduced in schoolrooms, but through quiet repetition. A child might walk beside a parent in silence, carrying a basket, listening to the snow under their feet and the way twigs snapped. Lessons came in fragments. Feel the tree bark. That means it's dry enough. See how the animal prints are spaced? That one was running. There was no need for long explanations. The land was the classroom, and the silence was filled with meaning. For the Nanettes, who would soon begin their long migration across the frozen tundra, autumn marked the last chance to prepare the reindeer sleds and fix torn harnesses. The women worked with furs, softening them with bone tools, and stretching them over curved wooden frames to create boots, gloves, and winter coats that would endure both frost and wind. Men checked the routes ahead, recalling the old trails from memory, guided not by signs but by the shape of hills, the scent of ice, and the feel of the wind. Along the migration path, they would mark places to return to, not with signs, but with stones laid a certain way, or a piece of cloth tied to a high branch, quiet signals understood only by those who had passed that way before. These markers did not speak to strangers. They whispered only to those who knew their meaning. In the forest where the Khanty and Mansi lived, autumn brought the mushroom season to a close. The final harvests were carefully dried above open fires, and any spoiled food was returned to the earth with apology. This wasn't waste, it was part of the cycle. Offerings were made more frequently now, to ensure that the spirits would be at peace during the long winter. Birch bark was folded into small boats and released into rivers. A tuft of animal fur was tied to a tree. Food was left out in the forest at dusk. These gestures were not dramatic. There were no crowds, no songs. They were acts of quiet relationship, acknowledging that the world was shared and that respect was owed. The seafaring Chukchi, preparing for the ice to return, turned their attention to the shorelines. Boats were hauled higher up the beach, protected from the first waves of frozen spray. Tools were sharpened, harpoons inspected, and the last hunts were conducted with careful precision. A single whale could feed a community for weeks, but the act of hunting it was sacred. Before the journey, elders spoke to the sea, sometimes aloud, sometimes in thought. We come with need, not greed. If the whale appeared, it was considered a gift. If it did not, no anger was shown, only patience. These beliefs were not romantic idealizations, but ways of ensuring balance between survival and humility. Back at camp, children sat around fires listening to stories of past winters. Times when food was scarce, but kindness abundant. When storms howled, but laughter inside the tent drowned them out. These stories were not meant to entertain, but to strengthen. They taught that fear could be endured, that hunger could be survived, and that what mattered most was not comfort, but togetherness. In the southern regions, where some indigenous groups had begun to live in more permanent wooden homes, traditions still held on. The floor of the home was swept each evening, not just for cleanliness, but to remove the day's troubles. A piece of bread might be placed on the windowsill to feed any passing spirits. A worn coat might be repaired and passed on to a younger cousin, its lining stitched with hidden blessings. The rhythm of life, even within walls, continued to echo the old ways, attentive, seasonal, and deeply respectful. As you drift now into sleep, let your thoughts settle like leaves on quiet earth. Imagine hands tying soft furs, fires crackling low, and voices speaking only when needed. In a world that rushes, these traditions ask nothing but patience. They remind us that slow work is still worthy, that silence is full of memory, and that even the smallest act, a stitch, a step, a whispered story, can carry generations forward. Winter in Siberia does not arrive suddenly. It comes gradually, yet inevitably, like a long breath being drawn deep into the lungs of the earth. The days shorten until twilight begins in the early afternoon. The wind carries a sharper edge, and the rivers, once bustling with fish and quiet paddles, slow into stillness beneath a growing crust of ice. Among the indigenous communities, this transition is not met with fear or frustration, but with quiet acceptance. Winter is not an interruption. It is a part of the cycle, a long chapter in the year's unfolding story. It is the season of retreat, reflection, and resilience. The Evenki begin to settle in more permanent winter encampments, often in thick forested areas protected from the worst of the storms. Chums are reinforced, insulated with extra furs, moss, and layers of bark. The hearth is prepared carefully, with stones arranged for maximum heat retention. Fire becomes not just a necessity, but a companion. It flickers beside sleeping children, crackles as food is boiled slowly, and casts long shadows that dance on the tent walls during stories. These stories become more frequent as the nights stretch longer. In the warm, smoky air, grandparents speak in slow, measured tones, their words softened by the rhythm of the flames. They recall winters long ago, when herds were nearly lost, when the snow came earlier than expected, or when a traveler followed a glowing fox through the blizzard and found safety. Each tale is rooted in survival, in perseverance, in the belief that no season, no matter how hard, lasts forever. Among the Nanettes, winter is a time of endurance. Entire communities, along with their reindeer, enter the deep tundra, moving from one prepared site to the next. Navigation through the endless white is done not with maps, but with memory. A certain curve in a hill, the shape of a rock half buried in snow. The way the wind moves over the ground, reindeer instinctively lead the way, their noses sniffing beneath the snow for lichen. Their steps steady even in blizzards. The people trust them, walking beside the herd in silence. In the evenings, after the tent is pitched and the herd corralled, families gather to eat soup made from frozen fish or dried meat, warmed with melted snow and wild herbs. The cold outside is vast and unrelenting, but inside the tent, there is warmth, laughter, and shared breath. Children play with small bone figurines. Elders hum songs with no beginning or end, songs that feel like the wind itself, moving in circles. For the Chukchi, whose homes stand near the frozen coast, winter brings a shift in focus from hunting to craft. Ivory, bone, and wood are carved into tools and small sculptures, not to sell or display, but to carry stories. A knife handle might hold the image of a whale hunt from long ago. A pendant might depict a dream. Women sew with care, using sinew thread and decorated leather, their hands moving in patterns passed down through generations. Clothing is made not just for warmth, but for meaning. A coat's lining may carry protective symbols stitched in blue thread. A pair of boots might have fur turned outward to honor a loved one who passed the winter before. These details are not for others to see. They are quiet conversations between the maker and the world. Inside, families share warmth, pressing close together under blankets. It is not uncommon to spend entire days indoors when storms rage outside. Food is rationed, sleep is long, and the body adjusts to the pace of darkness. Time stretches. A single pot of stew might be stirred all day. A single story might be told in several parts over many nights. There is no rush. There is only presence. In regions where the Khanty and Mansi stay, through winter in log cabins or semi-permanent structures, the hearth remains central. It is cleaned each morning, even when not in use, as a sign of respect to the fire spirit. Ashes are gathered with care, never discarded hastily. Dreams during winter are taken more seriously. The longer nights are said to thin the boundary between the waking world and the spirit realm. A dream of fire may signal change. A dream of ice breaking may be a warning. These dreams are shared over breakfast, between sips of hot broth, and rarely questioned. They are not interpreted with certainty, only acknowledged with quiet nods. Winter, in these cultures, is not only endured, it is embraced. It teaches patience. It strips life to its essentials. It demands cooperation, not competition. A neighbor's extra fur can save a life. A shared meal can bring joy in the midst of silence. And when the stars appear above the frozen sky, brighter than at any other time of year, people step outside their tents or homes, lift their eyes, and feel small, but not alone. As you drift deeper into sleep tonight, imagine the steady hush of snow falling in darkness, the low hum of a lullaby near a fire, and the warm weight of furs around your shoulders. Somewhere far north, beneath the same stars, these traditions continue. Not loud, not lost, but still glowing, like embers waiting for breath. As winter deepens and the frozen breath of the land stretches endlessly across the Siberian wilderness, the world seems to shrink and expand at the same time. The outside becomes still, quiet, layered with snow that muffles every sound, while inside the homes, tents, and shelters of indigenous communities, life grows inward, layered with memory, warmth, and connection. The snow piles high against the walls, forming natural insulation. Smoke curls gently from chimneys and tent holes, rising like old songs into the sky. In this season, there is no expectation of movement. The rivers are silent, the animals are hidden, and even the wind slows to a hush. People do not fight the cold, they coexist with it. They wrap themselves in it, understanding that survival here is not about resistance, but rhythm. Among the Evenki, families might spend entire days crafting, repairing, and creating, hands always moving, not hurriedly, but with a timeless steadiness. The making of a single pair of gloves could take several evenings, each stitch aligned with breath, each pattern carrying meaning. A diagonal line might represent a river crossed in youth. A repeating triangle might symbolize reindeer antlers or dreams of strength. These designs are not decorative. They are memory preserved in thread. The tent interior is dim but glowing, with the orange light of a fire bouncing gently off fur-covered walls. Children curl next to their mothers, tracing the beadwork with their fingers, listening to the quiet conversation that hums through the space like a second fire. In the north, among the Nanettes, who live exposed to some of the harshest conditions on Earth, winter becomes a masterclass in adaptation. Their reindeer herds remain close, corralled near the tent, noses buried in snow, searching for lichen beneath the surface. The humans mirror their resilience. Every task is performed with purpose. No energy is wasted. Meals are simple, hot, and dense. Frozen fish sliced thin and eaten raw, soup boiled from bone and fat, tea brewed from snow and pine. Conversation is sparse but kind. No one tells long stories in the cold. Instead, there are short phrases, nods, and shared looks that say more than paragraphs. A gesture to the wind, a raised eyebrow at the moon. In this space, silence becomes a language. Further east, the Chukchi turn to memory work. Elders, now wrapped in layers of sealskin and wool, sit beside the fire and tell origin stories, not just of the people, but of animals, weather, the sea. A whale who gave its life willingly, a bear who walked among humans disguised as a man, a mountain that once moved, then settled in sorrow and became still. These tales are not questioned or debated. They are not meant to be literal or logical. They are understood as truths from a different kind of knowing, one that holds spirit and stone in the same sentence. When children ask questions, the answers are often in story form, circular, poetic, slow. Why does the snow squeak beneath our feet? Because it remembers every step we've taken. These responses are not evasive. They are meant to widen the imagination, to encourage reverence. Among the Khanty, winter becomes a time for remembering those who have passed. A small wooden figure might be carved and placed on a windowsill, representing a grandmother or uncle. A bowl of broth might be left untouched for the spirits. Candles, made of animal fat and moss, are lit and allowed to burn slowly. The house grows quieter in their presence. Even laughter is softened. The dead are not feared. They are simply nearby, listening, waiting, part of the warmth. If a dream includes a departed relative, it is shared carefully in the morning. The interpretation is done not with books, but with feeling. She came to remind us of the spring. He smiled, so we will be safe this season. There is no judgment, only gentle listening. In the deepest nights of the year, when the sun disappears almost completely and the stars remain for what feels like a lifetime, people sleep longer and deeper. Dreams become more vivid, more layered. Some believe that the spirit can travel more easily during these nights, passing between the waking world and the shadow world beyond. It is common for someone to wake slowly and remain still, eyes closed, recalling the details of a dream, its colors, sounds, and sensations. These dreams are shared quietly, and sometimes they guide the day's activities. If someone dreams of firewood, perhaps it means to check the supply. If a fox appears, maybe it's time to walk the forest edge and see what has changed. The rhythm of winter is not simply survival. It is participation in an ancient dialogue with the earth, with each other, with time itself. No alarms ring, no clocks chime. The day begins when the fire is stirred and ends when the last story is finished. And when the sky is clear and the stars burn above the snow, it feels as if the world is breathing with you, slow, soft, unbroken. As you lie here now, with the weight of blankets pressing gently over you like the snow on a quiet plain, remember that there are places in the world where nothing needs to be rushed, where a single breath can carry history, where warmth comes not from noise or motion, but from stillness, from presence, from being part of something older than memory. Let yourself rest in that thought. Let the night take its time. As the final weeks of winter pass slowly across the Siberian expanse, and the air begins to whisper promises of returning light, life within the indigenous communities remains calm, deliberate, and rooted in quiet expectancy. The snow still falls, soft as breath, but it carries with it a subtle change. The light, though faint, begins to linger longer on the horizon. The days stretch by mere minutes, but those minutes are noticed. They are measured not by clocks, but by shadows cast on packed snow, by how long a kettle takes to boil, by the angle of the sun as it brushes the tops of the tallest trees. Among the Evenki, this period is known not for its activity, but for its awareness. It is a season of noticing, of listening to the land as it stirs ever so slightly from its deep slumber. Elders sit by the fire and listen to the silence itself, the way it shifts, the way it carries hints of thaw. Children learn to recognize the sound of snow softening, the way frozen branches begin to drip, the way the air feels different on the skin just before the season turns. There are no sudden declarations, no marked holidays, only subtle gestures, a loosened scarf, a tent flap left open for a few extra minutes, a glance upward at the shifting sky. Among the Nenettes, preparations for the eventual migration begin in the mind before they begin in motion. People speak more often of trails, of the places they'll soon pass again. Reindeer are watched more carefully, their coats inspected for signs of shedding, their movements read like scripture. A herd's behavior can predict the timing of the thaw better than any calendar. Harnesses are mended, sleds are rechecked, supplies are counted not with anxiety, but with quiet confidence. The people know the rhythm. It is the same one their ancestors followed and their ancestors before them. These final weeks of winter are not about waiting. They are about remembering that survival is not an act of dominance over nature, but a relationship with it, a conversation built over centuries. In Chukchi communities, coastal winds begin to shift, and with them come changes in the ice. Hunters watch the sea closely, the patterns in the cracks, the thickness of the edges, the way birds begin to move again. These signs are ancient and intuitive. No one announces them aloud, but everyone knows what they mean. The tools of spring hunts are slowly unearthed from their winter storage, inspected for wear, their grips softened by time. Harpoons, nets, fishing lines, all handmade, all cared for like family. Nothing is disposable. Everything holds memory. The children of these villages, now older by a season, have grown into their boots. They help more now. They fetch water, carry wood, help stretch hides. They do so with quiet pride, not because they are told, but because they are part of something. Belonging is not granted through achievement here. It is felt through action, through being needed. The long nights continue, but dreams begin to shift. They become brighter, filled with symbols of movement, flowing rivers, flying birds, open paths. Among the Kanti and Mansi, dreams during this transition period are shared more readily. They are believed to carry messages not just for the individual, but for the group. A woman's dream of a bear might lead the family to change direction during the migration. A child's dream of a broken tree might be seen as a reminder to repair an old trail marker. These insights are not analyzed with precision, but honored with trust. A community that listens to its dreams is a community that listens to its soul. Inside the shelters, meals continue to be simple and warm, stews made of last season's dried roots and meat. Tea brewed from pine and dried flowers, bread baked over coals, dense and nourishing. Conversation remains sparse but meaningful. A question about the wind, a memory of a summer past, a story retold for the 50th time, its edges smoothed with repetition, its core unchanged. These stories do not exist to impress. They exist to anchor, to say, we were here, we are still here, and when the sun finally rises just high enough to light the tops of distant hills, when the snow glitters not just with cold, but with promise, the people begin to prepare, not with haste, not with noise, but with readiness. The season has turned. Soon the tents will be folded, the sleds loaded, the reindeer stirred from their deep-standing rest. But for now, in this last breath of winter, they sit in stillness. They sit in gratitude. They sit in the knowledge that the land has held them once more. And as you settle into sleep tonight, know that across the snowy silence of Siberia, there are fires still burning, songs still humming, and hearts still beating in rhythm, with a world that asks only for respect, for patience, and for presence. Let that rhythm carry you gently into your dreams. With spring finally brushing its fingers across the snow-covered plains of Siberia, the change in the air is unmistakable, even though the snow has not yet fully melted and the wind still carries a memory of ice. The skies grow lighter each day, and the sun lingers longer above the treetops, casting gold on white and awakening the first subtle movements of the land. The rivers remain frozen at the center, but along the edges they begin to stir, cracking quietly under the surface. Birds return, not in flocks, but in ones and twos, calling to one another from bare branches, testing the air. The indigenous communities notice these changes with practiced eyes, honed by generations of quiet observation. Nothing is rushed. Spring is not a moment. It is a slow unfolding. The Evenki elders speak of the first melt as a sacred time, a moment when the earth exhales. They say that the snow has memory, and as it melts, it releases the stories it has been holding since autumn, the footsteps of ancestors, the tracks of reindeer, the echo of old songs. Children are reminded to step softly now, to listen, to watch how the snow recedes from the fire pit, how water drips from the edge of the tent flap in steady rhythm. It is said that when the first icicle falls naturally from the roof, it carries the last of winter's dreams, and whoever witnesses it will walk with clarity that year. Among the Nenettes, migration planning begins in full, not with formal meetings or commands, but through shared glances and brief conversations as people go about their tasks. The reindeer sense the coming journey and begin to shift their energy, moving more, testing their strength. The sleds, stored all winter, are brought into the sunlight, checked for cracks, and repaired with quiet care. Leather is softened, ropes are replaced. Children watch, some helping, some simply observing the rhythm of tradition that has shaped their people for hundreds of years. The youngest ones are told about the landmarks they will pass, the hill shaped like a sleeping bear, the frozen lake with the silver line of stones, the old tree with the carved symbol no outsider ever notices. These places are more than waypoints. They are chapters in a story that is lived again each year. For the Chukchi along the coast, the melting begins differently. Sea ice groans and stretches, and in some places, small channels of open water begin to appear. This signals a shift in activity. Boats are inspected, ropes untied, nets unraveled, but nothing is hurried. The people know the sea decides the pace. They watch the way the ice breaks, where, how, and when. They listen to the wind. They feel the moisture in the air. The sea has its own language, and those who have lived beside it since birth understand when to go and when to wait. Offerings are made quietly, small bones placed on the stone, bits of dried meat tucked into crevices, words whispered into the wind, not to ask for luck, but to acknowledge the relationship. In the southern forested regions, where Khanty and Mansi families prepare their log homes for warmer months, the first tasks of spring are personal. The hearth is cleaned thoroughly, and the ashes of winter are spread carefully at the forest edge, with thanks. Tools used throughout the cold season are polished and placed back into storage, sometimes with a small cloth wrap or carved token to ensure good fortune when next used. The first walk into the woods is taken with intention, not to gather, not to hunt, but to greet. Elders walk slowly, brushing their hands against tree bark, speaking under their breath, checking the land like one visits an old friend. Spring cleaning here is not about dust and clutter, but about energy, opening the home to light, allowing old shadows to drift away with the melting snow. Songs begin to change too. The slow, droning winter chants give way to lighter melodies, still quiet, still deliberate, but with more space between the notes. Children sing as they play outside again, their laughter mingling with birdsong. Mothers hum while sewing new garments, their fingers dancing with needle and thread. And old stories are told with a different tone, not the heavy lessons of survival, but tales of beginnings, of rebirth, of the world waking up. Among the many small rituals that mark this time, one remains common across cultures: the boiling of new tea from the first herbs that sprout. It might be a few pine buds, a pinch of early moss, or some dried leaves stored from last summer. The tea is shared among family members in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because the moment is already full of memory, of hope, of presence. As you settle into sleep tonight, picture the soft thawing of a silent world, the gentle dripping of snow, the flicker of light on bark, the slow inhale of a people deeply in tune with their land. Let your thoughts melt like the last icicle on the roof. Let your breath fall in rhythm with the trees returning to life. Somewhere far from noise, a fire is still burning low, a reindeer is shifting in the snow, and a story is waiting to be told with the return of spring. As spring deepens and the last stubborn patches of snow retreat into shaded hollows, the indigenous peoples of Siberia begin to reawaken their lives in fuller movement. It is not a sudden rush, nor an explosion of activity. It is a slow, thoughtful unfolding. The rivers, no longer burdened by thick ice, begin to flow freely again, murmuring their return through wooded valleys and across silent tundra. The breeze grows softer, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine, of thawed moss and distant smoke. In this gentle return of the season, the land itself seems to breathe again. Among the Evenki, families begin to shift toward their summer rhythms. With the snow melted, travel becomes easier, and camps are moved toward higher ground or closer to rivers. The reindeer, leaner from winter, begin to feed with purpose, their hooves once again tapping steadily across soft terrain. Tents are taken down and rebuilt further along traditional migration paths. The movements are calm, predictable, part of an annual pattern that is both ancient and alive. Children run with more freedom now, their feet bare, their hands sticky with tree sap, and their eyes open wide to the tiny details of the forest. The insects crawling under stones, the buds breaking open on branches, the sudden appearance of a bird's egg hidden in grass. These are not distractions but lessons. Each one teaches stillness, observation, connection. The adults do not interrupt to explain. They allow the land to teach what it knows. The Nenettes begin their long northward migration, following the ancient lines of reindeer instinct. The weather shifts quickly now. Rain comes in quiet bursts. The sky seems wider, less heavy. The people pack only what is needed, leaving behind what is no longer useful, not as waste, but as offering. A broken basket might be tucked beneath a tree, a worn pair of boots left beside a rock. The act is not abandonment. It is release, a way of saying, "We have used you well. Now return to the earth." The journey is slow. Each day begins early, with the sun rising to cast golden light across endless white and brown plains. Sleds are pulled steadily, the older reindeer taking the lead, the young ones learning from their pace. Meals are simple: dried fish, wild herbs, sometimes a warm broth if firewood is found. People sleep closely, huddled beneath blankets, listening to the wind move through the herd at night like a second breath. For the Chukchi, spring marks the first true return to the water. Boats are launched carefully into calmer seas. The ice floes have drifted further out now, and open water glistens under a sky no longer dulled by snow. Men and women fish quietly, their movements measured, their voices low. There is a reverence in the way the net is lowered, in how the first catch is received. Not held high, not shouted over, but cradled, thanked, and returned to the water if it is too small. Children are taught how to gut fish, not through instruction, but through demonstration. They watch, then mimic. Mistakes are corrected gently. Skills are built like fires, layer by layer, patient, lasting. Along the forest edges, the Kanti and Mansi begin gathering spring herbs. These are not collected in heaps, but carefully, plant by plant. Each root, each leaf is recognized by name and habit. Some are for food, some are for healing, some are left alone. The first herbs are always offered back. One picked, one placed at the base of the tree or rock it grew near. This exchange is silent, and yet it is one of the most important teachings. It says, "You are not separate from this place. You are part of it." The preparation of medicine begins slowly. Leaves are dried in the sun, then stored in woven pouches. Roots are boiled and the liquid cooled. Children taste each one and are told their use, not just what they cure, but when to use them and when to wait. Illness is treated not as invasion, but as imbalance. Healing is not rushed, it is observed, it is earned. As the days lengthen, people return to tasks that had waited all winter. Baskets are woven from fresh reeds, canoes are patched and painted with symbols. Carvings are made not for art, but for memory. A small piece of driftwood might become a charm. A bone left from a winter meal might become a pendant. Each object holds story. Each story holds place. As you drift into sleep now, picture the land unfolding with care. Picture the ice dissolving into water, the fire pit being lit again after months of snow, the footsteps of people following paths they've walked since childhood and yet still walk with wonder. There is no need to hurry, there never was. All that matters is attention, presence, and the quiet willingness to move in harmony with the world around you. Somewhere far from the noise of urgency, someone is watching the first flower push through the earth. Someone is singing to a newborn calf. Someone is placing a smooth stone in the palm of a child and saying, "This is where we begin again." As spring ripens into early summer and the landscape of Siberia softens with each passing day, the rhythm of life among the indigenous peoples begins to shift once again. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with a steady, almost invisible grace. The trees are no longer bare. Their leaves flutter gently in the breeze, small and delicate at first, then fuller, casting dappled light across the forest floor. The ground, once hard and frozen, now breathes moisture and new growth. Wildflowers begin to bloom in quiet clusters, nestled between rocks, peeking from tufts of moss, their colors muted but vivid against the green-brown earth. The birdsong grows more complex, more varied. Insects hum quietly in the warm air. The days stretch long into twilight, and the nights no longer bite with cold. In this softened world, the Evenki people settle into the early routines of the gathering season. Tools are retrieved, baskets unpacked, and paths to old berry grounds are walked again. These paths are not marked on any map, but known in the body, remembered by the turn of a root, the bend of a tree, the sound of water nearby. Children walk behind their elders, watching not just what they do, but how they move, how they pause, how they listen. When the first berries are found, they are not eaten immediately but held up, shown to the sky, and offered. Only then does the real harvest begin, slow and careful. Every handful gathered is considered. Nothing is taken greedily. The gathering is not just for food. It is for winter, for medicine, for ceremony, and always for sharing. Among the Nenets, this time of year means tending to the herds more closely. The reindeer calves are growing quickly, still uncertain on their legs, but strong. The adults begin to shed their thick winter coats, revealing smoother fur beneath. People take this opportunity to groom them, to brush out the loose hairs, to check their hooves and antlers. The bond between human and reindeer is not transactional. It is ancient and emotional. A herder may speak softly to a reindeer as they work, using nicknames, small sounds, or even songs. These are not commands, they are conversations. The reindeer listen, they know the tone of voice. They know the hand that feeds them, the scent of the coat, the rhythm of the walk. In the high summer sun, people nap in short stretches under the tents, the doors left open to the breeze. Sleep is lighter now. Dreams are more active, less symbolic, filled with movement and warmth. When someone dreams of a fire that does not burn, or a bird that lands on the hand, it is considered a blessing, a sign of ease to come. Dream interpretation is gentle, never rigid. It means you are walking well, someone might say. It means the spirits are near, but they are quiet. Along the coast where the Chukchi live, summer means both abundance and attention. The sea, though less dangerous, is never to be taken for granted. Fish arrive in greater numbers now, and seals can be spotted basking on distant ice, but storms can still rise quickly, and fog can fall without warning. The people watch the sky constantly. They listen to the birds, the rhythm of the waves, the tension in the wind. Boats are launched with purpose, always blessed before they leave shore. The first catch is honored. Some of it is cooked immediately, some dried for storage, and a small piece is returned to the water, wrapped in seaweed or tied with grass. This is not a rule. It is a relationship. Further inland, in Kanti and Mansi territories, the gathering of bark, roots, and wood becomes central. Birch bark is peeled with care, never stripping too much from one tree. It is softened over fire, then shaped into containers, roof linings, even shoes. The work is done communally, with hands of all ages contributing. A grandmother might show a teenager how to fold the bark without splitting it, how to cure it in smoke, how to bind it with sinew. These skills are never written. They are passed skin to skin, eye to hand, and with every object made, a story is carried forward. Evenings in early summer are filled with a different kind of silence, not empty but satisfied. Fires burn lower. People sit in smaller groups, not always speaking. Sometimes they hum, sometimes they just sit, watching the shadows move across the ground as the sun slowly dips below the trees. The food is simpler now, fresher. Boiled herbs, cooked fish, smoked meat. Everything tastes of the land. Everything is eaten with attention. And when the stars finally begin to return, faint at first, people step outside their tents and cabins, not to marvel, but to greet. The stars are old friends. Their arrival means another season has turned. Another page has been added to the story. As you prepare to drift into sleep tonight, imagine this soft unfolding of life. A basket being filled with quiet hands, a reindeer brushing against its caretaker's side, a fire smoldering while someone carves meaning into wood. This is not history frozen in time. This is memory alive in practice. The earth moves slowly, and so do the people who listen to it. Let your thoughts settle into that pace. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the wind that moves through pine trees. Somewhere far away, someone is stitching bark into a container, humming a song they don't remember learning, but never forgot how to sing. As summer deepens its hold across the Siberian expanse, the days grow longer still, stretching endlessly beneath pale blue skies that seem to never fully darken. In many regions, the sun barely dips below the horizon, and twilight lingers as a silver veil that softens every shape and sound. This is the season of light, the time when shadows rest, and the land, free from the burdens of snow and silence, reveals its full texture. The grasses grow tall and wild, rippling in slow waves across meadows and open tundra. Forests hum with unseen life. Small flowers bloom in quiet corners, their colors delicate and fleeting. The air is warm, sometimes heavy with moisture, but never stifling. It carries the scent of moss, lichen, river stones, and smoke. Among the Evenki, this is the season of full activity. Camps are set for longer stays near rivers or lakes, where fishing is easiest and water is abundant. Canoes, shaped from hollowed birch trunks, glide silently across glassy surfaces, paddled by quiet hands that know every bend of the current. Children learn to fish not through commands, but through observation. They are handed small spears or lines and told only to watch, to listen, to feel. When the line tugs, they are taught to wait. Wait longer than they think they should, because the fish might test the bait once, then return. Patience is the first skill, followed by stillness. Laughter is frequent but soft. There is joy in the work and pride in doing it well. Catches are shared. Nothing is hoarded. Nearby, baskets of berries are gathered, again with care. Some are eaten fresh. Others are crushed into thick pastes and stored in bark containers. A few are dried in the sun for winter use. Women sing softly while they work. Not songs with words, but long melodic syllables that match the rhythm of their hands. These songs are not performed. They are breathed. They rise and fall like wind through trees. In the tundra, the nenets tend to their growing herds, which now graze across vast open stretches, under a sun that barely sleeps. The animals are strong, confident, and curious. Children run among them, calling out names, touching antlers, guiding young ones gently away from dangerous paths. The tents are aired, the furs shaken free of winter's dust, and the tools used for skinning and tanning are cleaned and laid out in long rows. Summer is the time for preparing materials: furs, sinew, bone, wood, that will be used when the snow returns. Each resource is taken respectfully, with offerings made to the land. A bone from a reindeer's leg is placed near a stone. A fish head is returned to the water. These acts are quiet and consistent, reminders of balance, of the cycle that gives and takes in equal measure. Along the coast, Chukchi families watch the sea closely. The rhythms of tides, the movements of whales, the way seabirds gather in certain places. All of these offer signs. When the sea is calm, boats are taken out further. When the waves darken, people stay on shore, mending nets, drying fish, preparing for the next opportunity. Shellfish are collected along the rocks. Children are taught how to tell which are safe, how to feel for them beneath wet sand, how to cook them over open flames without ruining their flavor. These are the smallest lessons, but they matter. A child who can prepare a meal with 2 hands and firewood has learned a kind of independence that no classroom can teach. The Khanty and Mansi, deep in the forested south, gather plants now in their most potent state. This is the season for medicine. Stems are clipped just after dew dries. Flowers are harvested in early morning light. Everything is categorized, some for pain, some for fever, some for spirit. Roots are dug only with permission. A small stone is placed in the hole before it is covered again, as a gesture of thanks. Back at the shelters, drying racks are filled. Smokehouses operate slowly. Young people are taught how to layer the herbs properly, how to wrap them in birch bark, how to hang them from beams where heat can rise gently. They are also taught restraint. Not everything gathered must be used. The forest gives, but it also rests and must be allowed to recover. This ethic of care is present in every interaction, with the land, with tools, with one another. Even disputes are settled differently in summer. Tensions are cooled with time, not argument. A disagreement may be followed by a day of silence and then a shared task. Fetching wood together, preparing a meal, and slowly words return. Not forced, just allowed. As the sun hovers low in the sky, casting long golden shadows that never quite disappear, people sit outside their tents and cabins, quiet, watching, resting. Meals are eaten slowly, feet are bare, songs drift in and out of hearing, and as night fails to fully arrive, sleep still comes, soft and deep, like moss beneath the trees. And so tonight, as you listen and rest, imagine the warm hush of a Siberian summer evening, the hum of insects, the creak of wooden beams, the breath of reindeer resting nearby. Let yourself move into that slowness. Let your breath match the quiet. Somewhere far away, the light never fades completely. It only softens. And in that soft light, old traditions still walk the earth, unbroken. As the high summer days begin to edge toward their peak, the land of Siberia enters a time of quiet fullness, when everything that can grow has grown, and everything that can bloom has opened. The rivers run wide and steady, carrying with them the memory of snow and the promise of fish. The forests are thick with green, and the air hums with insects, their wings weaving invisible patterns between trees and over open meadows. The sky is a dome of uninterrupted light, pale and golden at once, with clouds that drift slowly like thoughts not yet spoken. Among the indigenous communities who have lived with this land for generations, this is a season of abundance. Not wasteful, but mindful. A season of careful harvesting, deep gratitude, and shared labor. The Evenki people take this time to rest in their own way, not through inactivity, but through steady rhythm. Days begin early but gently, with no alarms, only the sound of birds and the warmth of the sun pressing through the fabric of the tent. The fire is stirred without words. Tea is brewed over embers while the children begin their chores, collecting water, sweeping away leaves, feeding the dogs, helping carry tools to where the elders work. Everything has its place. The world feels balanced. Tools made in the early summer are now in constant use. Traps are set for small animals, fish lines are checked, and bark canoes slip through the quiet streams that wind through birch groves. Along the riverbanks, Families gather not in haste, but in peace, each person with a task, all contributing to the quiet purpose of the day. Among the Nanettes, the long migration paths of spring have given way to summer grazing. The herds are calmer now, spread out across vast open plains, their antlers catching the sunlight like delicate branches. Children are given more freedom this season. They wander further from camp, explore the folds of the land, splash through shallow creeks, lie in the grass watching clouds drift by. Still, they are never far from watchful eyes. At night, they return with arms full of flowers, smooth stones, and small discoveries, feathers, bones, strange-shaped twigs. These are shown to elders not to be praised, but to be shared. Every object becomes a story, every story a lesson. In the evening, the tents glow softly, and dinner is cooked with ingredients gathered through the day. There is no feast, no excess, just enough. A pot of fish soup, a slab of dried meat, a handful of berries. The Chukchi near the coast find this season ideal for learning from the sea. The tides are more predictable, and the waters, though still cold and commanding, offer more gifts. Seaweed is gathered and dried. Shells are collected not only for decoration, but for their practical use, as tools, bowls, or small offerings to the spirits. Older men teach the younger ones how to read the sky, not by color alone, but by texture, by the shape of clouds, by the direction of wind over the sea's surface. These lessons are not always spoken. A boy might sit for hours beside his father or grandfather, not asking questions, just watching. In this stillness, understanding is passed hand to hand, glance to glance. The Khanty and Mansi, surrounded by thick forest and winding rivers, now enter one of their most culturally rich times of year. Summer is the season of small ceremonies. Personal, family-based, intimate gatherings that mark nothing grand, but everything important. A new baby's first step on the earth. A marriage spoken not in public vows, but in shared tasks. The first successful hunt by a young boy. These are honored with fire, with quiet song, with symbolic gifts, perhaps a carved spoon, a stitched pouch, or a simple bracelet of bark and twine. There are no crowds, no announcements, only presence. And always the land is part of the ceremony. A tree might be touched in thanks. A river might be spoken to. A stone might be turned upright and left behind as a marker. These acts are not for tradition's sake. They are lived truths, held gently. As the days move slowly forward, the people move with them. Work is done in long stretches, broken by rest and quiet conversation. There are no deadlines. A coat will be finished when it is ready. A boat will be patched when the materials feel dry. No one measures success in speed. Instead, it is measured in usefulness, in beauty, in the feeling that something has been made well and with care. And when the sun finally begins to dip just a little lower, when the shadows lengthen slightly, and the first hints of late summer begin to whisper through the trees, no one panics. No one hurries. They simply notice. They prepare. They welcome the next rhythm, knowing that the cycle is not ending, only deepening. As you drift now into sleep, let your breath slow with the river. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across the long Siberian sky. Somewhere far away, a reindeer turns its head to the wind. A fire crackles low. A child presses a stone into an elder's hand. And the world continues, gently, as it always has. As the gentle glow of midsummer begins to mellow and the air shifts with the faintest promise of change, the indigenous peoples of Siberia, still immersed in the long daylight hours, begin to listen more closely for the subtle cues that signal the season's quiet turning. The wind carries a different scent now, less sharp, more earthy, as the grasses mature and the flowers that bloomed weeks ago begin to fade. The forests, once bursting with the soft greens of new growth, deepen in hue, and the rustling of the leaves takes on a slightly lower tone, like a whisper preparing to rest. The skies, though still wide and blue, begin to host longer stretches of cloud, and at night, stars return slowly to their ancient positions, watched from beneath fur-lined blankets by those who rise early or sleep lightly. For the Evenki, this is a time to begin gathering with greater purpose. What was once picked casually is now collected more intentionally. Berries for drying, roots for storage, herbs for medicine. These are not tasks done in haste, but with a quiet understanding that the land gives in cycles, and that to live well through winter, one must begin now, in the height of light. Children are taught which berries stain the fingers red and which ones must be handled with caution. The baskets used are not store-bought, but hand-woven, each one shaped by someone's memory, someone's hands, someone's past season. Nearby, older family members begin to sort and mend clothing in preparation for colder days ahead. Boots are inspected, furs are softened, tears and hides are stitched slowly while stories are shared, not stories of fear or warning, but those of past years. The year the fish came late, the time snow arrived early, the summer when the sky never cried. These tales are not cautionary, they are grounding. They remind everyone that no year is the same, but every year is survivable. Along the coast, the Chukchi take careful note of the tides, which begin to shift in timing, and of the birds, whose calls change subtly with the month. Fish are still plentiful, but their patterns grow less predictable. Boats are launched with more intention, and returns are followed by quiet assessments. The number of fish, their size, the way they fought the line. These small observations guide the rhythm of work and rest. There is no anxiety, only presence. A strong day of fishing is celebrated not with noise, but with an extra helping of soup shared around the fire, or a story told with more laughter than usual. In forest communities of the Khanty and Mansi, the work turns to preservation. Wild mushrooms, plucked after a good rain, are dried on racks made of twigs and tied with strips of bark. Meat is smoked slowly in huts built for this purpose, the scent drifting through the trees like a memory. Hands move in repetition, slice, hang, turn, check, without complaint, because the rhythm is old, familiar, almost sacred. Time is not wasted. Even moments of rest are purposeful. A walk into the woods is not an escape but a communion. A seat by the river is not idleness but listening. Dreams during the season are marked by longer journeys. People dream of distant places, sometimes of cities they've never seen, sometimes of landscapes now covered by water or forest. These dreams are not seen as visions, but as part of the imagination's seasonal cycle, just as the land stretches out and breathes in its fullest form before preparing to let go. When one dreams of a trail that leads nowhere or of a familiar place rearranged, it is said to be the mind adjusting to change. A gentle change, a natural one. Among the Nenettes, signs of the next migration are discussed more frequently. The reindeer begin to stir differently at night. The wind patterns are observed with more seriousness. Families gather to check their supplies, not because they are leaving yet, but because it is wise to be ready. Readiness here is not about urgency, it is about rhythm. A tarp is patched, a kettle is scrubbed, a child is shown how to roll up a tent skin just tight enough to carry, but not so tight it cannot breathe. The land too seems to lean in. Birds fly lower, the sun lingers less in the evening sky. Even the insects, once frantic with movement, now seem to hum with slower purpose. And as this gentle shift continues, the people do not resist. They do not mourn the passing of the longest days. Instead, they honor them, with soft meals, with finished carvings, with a lullaby sung in a voice that wavers like the wind. As you prepare for sleep now, let yourself imagine that world of gentle preparation, a hand tying bundles of herbs, a fire burning lower but steadier, a voice reminding a child that change is not something to fear, but something to meet with open eyes and warm hands. Somewhere far to the north, someone is sitting beneath a sky that still glows at midnight, holding a basket full of what the land has given. They smile without speaking, knowing that the cycle continues, and that the earth, even in its turning, always offers enough. As the long Siberian summer begins its quiet descent into the gentler light of early autumn, the indigenous communities who have lived in rhythm with this land for countless generations begin to shift with it. Not suddenly, not with alarm, but with the same patience and attentiveness that has carried them through each turning season. The air, once thick with warmth, now carries a cooler undertone, like a soft sigh from the earth itself. Mornings are mistier. Dew clings to every blade of grass, every leaf, every tent flap. The birds, still present, sing differently now, less frantic, more thoughtful, as if preparing to leave or quiet themselves for the coming chill. The trees do not turn gold overnight, but their leaves begin to dull ever so slightly, their edges curling, their green fading into something older. For the Evenki, this is a time of inventory, of slowing the hands without stopping them. The final berries are gathered before frost reaches them. Fish are caught in fewer numbers now, but still with care. The canoes are brought further up the banks after each use. Children are taught not just how to gather, but how to preserve. They watch as berries are mashed, mixed with fat or dried alone on mats. They learn how to check if a piece of dried meat is ready by its sound when tapped, not by its look. These skills are passed through tone, through touch, through gesture. No lectures, just presence. The elders move more slowly now, but they are the center of every camp. Their stories, told more often as the days grow shorter, are no longer lessons for survival, but reminders of meaning. Why this tree is never cut, why that river is never crossed alone, why the stars shift in pairs. Among the Nanettes, the signs of the next migration begin to settle into clarity. The reindeer grow restless, their movements more deliberate. The people start organizing their loads, mending the last of the sled harnesses, checking the fur linings of clothing. A good coat is tested not just for warmth, but for silence. If it rustles too much, it won't hold heat. Children help by packing small bundles, learning the rhythm of rolling, tying, stacking. In the quiet of dusk, as the herds graze on the softening tundra, families sit outside their tents with cups of warm broth, not speaking much, just watching the land. It is during this season that conversations grow even more sparse, not out of discomfort, but because everything essential has already been said. In Chukchi villages near the sea, the last fishing trips are taken with extra care. The ocean, growing colder, begins to speak differently. Waves crash a bit harder. The air smells sharper. Boats are brought ashore earlier in the day. The drying racks are full, and the seaweed gathered earlier is now used to wrap the last preserved catch. The community prepares to shift their focus from movement to stillness. Homes are reinforced. Openings are patched. Tools are sharpened one final time before storage. Children listen more than they speak now, sensing the solemnity of the change. But there is no dread, only preparation. The Kanti and Mansi, whose forests now begin to change color in earnest, mark the early fall with small offerings. A braid of grass tied around a tree trunk, a carved stick placed gently in a stream. These are not rituals in the grand sense. They are acknowledgments. They say, "Thank you for what has been. We are ready for what comes next." And the first fallen leaves are not swept away but left to rest. Fires are lit earlier in the evening, and meal times shift slightly, following the sun. People begin to sleep longer again, rising with the light rather than ahead of it. This return to slowness is not resistance, it is alignment. During this time, dreams often become more vivid, more rooted in memory. People speak of seeing relatives long gone, of walking through forests they've never entered in waking life, of rivers flowing backward, or mountains rising gently from the earth. These dreams are not questioned. They are shared quietly, their meanings left open. A dream is not a message to decode, but a companion to carry. As the stars begin to return in fuller numbers, constellations re-emerge with clarity. Children are taught their names: the reindeer, the sled, the fire circle. These names are not found in books. They are local, personal, tied to stories that only this place has known. In the hush of a late summer night, under a sky that is slowly turning dark again, a family might lie together beneath firs, looking upward, whispering stories that have been spoken for hundreds of years. And as you rest now, listening from a place far away, imagine that sky, wide, silent, full of meaning. Imagine the soft murmur of a fire just beyond the edge of sleep. Imagine someone placing a final berry in a basket, tying it shut with care and saying nothing, because the season is speaking for them. And what it says is enough. By the time early autumn has fully settled over the Siberian landscape, the shift in energy is unmistakable. The heat of summer no longer lingers, and each breath of wind carries with it the faint scent of dry leaves, distant smoke, and damp soil preparing for frost. The trees, now in their last stage of color, stand like quiet flames across the hills and riverbanks, burnt orange, soft gold, and deep crimson. The sky seems wider again, clearer and cooler, stretching above fields where grasses bend lower with the weight of dew and time. The land is neither asleep nor fully awake. It is somewhere in between, in a soft pause, a hush before the cold. The indigenous peoples of this region, who have always understood the value of this in-between, begin to transition their pace once again. Among the evenki, the harvesting is nearly complete. Fish have been dried, roots stored, berries sealed into bark containers, and furs cleaned and folded for winter use. What remains now are the final preparations. Not rushed, not loud, but consistent. Firewood is gathered in measured amounts and stacked not just for function, but with quiet precision. A good woodpile stands balanced, protected from snow and rain, able to last through long nights. The younger ones are taught how to choose wood that burns long, how to split it with a single careful strike, and how to listen to the sound of the crack to know if the piece is ready. The tents are reinforced with extra layers, doorways are checked, fur linings are softened with care. These are acts of security, not fear, but foresight. Among the Nanettes, reindeer herds are moved for the last time before the snow comes. The animals sense it too. Their movements become tighter, more communal. The paths chosen now are those that will bring them close to the protected wintering grounds. At night, their breath hangs in the air longer. Their coats thicken, their pace slows. The people walk beside them in silence, guiding, not leading. As the migration stops, tents are set in more sheltered places, by rock formations, near clusters of trees, or beside frozen riverbanks. The rhythm of life turns inward. Cooking fires glow through thick felt walls, and the scent of boiled meat, pine tea, and smoke becomes the smell of the season. Families sleep closer, stories grow longer. Time stretches out like a reindeer skin drawing over the frame. For the Chukchi, final hunting and fishing efforts shift toward land and ice. The sea becomes too restless now, its surface breaking and freezing unpredictably. The horizon is less inviting, so the people turn their attention to what remains nearby. Snares are laid, tracks are read in soft earth and light snow, traps are checked before dawn, and the meat is preserved with salt and cold. Inside, tools are organized, mended, and stored. Clothes are stitched with firmer thread. Children help where they can, fetching small bundles, sorting bones and antlers, watching intently as a knife is sharpened or a sled is inspected for cracks. These tasks, so ordinary, are given their own rhythm, their own ceremony. Each object touched is treated with respect, not because it is sacred in itself, but because it carries the work of many hands, many seasons. In the Kanti and Mansi regions, ceremonies marking the turn of season are simple but meaningful. A piece of bread placed on a stump, a candle made of tallow burned at dusk. An elder might walk alone into the forest, stop beneath a specific tree, and stand there for some time, saying nothing. No one follows, but everyone understands. These quiet rituals are not performed for gods or outsiders. They are conversations with the land, acknowledgments of another cycle completed, a sign of readiness. As the nights grow darker and longer, stars begin to take their places again in the cold sky. The constellations are named aloud now, often to children curled near the fire. The reindeer, the hearth, the little spoon, not because the children don't know, but because the names, spoken aloud, keep the stories warm. Around the fire, songs are slower now, less melody, more rhythm, a heartbeat, a footstep, a reminder. Dreams shift too, less about movement, more about memory. People dream of the places they've been, the faces they remember, the sounds of summer echoing faintly behind them. These dreams are shared in fragments over breakfast or tea, and no one questions them. They are accepted as part of the turning, as leaves falling or frost forming. As you begin to close your eyes tonight, imagine the last moments before the land sleeps, the final footsteps over soft grass, the crackling of firewood being split and stacked, a carved spoon placed into storage, a child falling asleep to the sound of wind brushing the side of a tent. Somewhere in the still north, a people are doing what they have always done, not resisting the cold, but welcoming it, knowing that in the quiet, there is safety, in the slowness, there is wisdom, and in the dark, there is rest. As the first true frosts settle across the vast landscape of Siberia, and the long golden days of autumn give way to the pale breath of winter, the world changes its tone once again. The grasses, once tall and vibrant, now lie flattened by morning ice, their color faded into muted browns and grays. Trees stand bare, their limbs drawn in, like arms folded against the coming cold. Ponds freeze over at the edges, then in the middle, until one morning they no longer ripple at all. The sound of wind takes on a sharper voice, weaving through the forest with more insistence. In this stillness, in this hush before the deep snow comes, the indigenous communities of Siberia move gently into a season they know intimately, not with fear or reluctance, but with ancient familiarity. For the Evenki, this is the time to retreat into smaller camps or more permanent winter shelters. The lightweight chums are insulated further, sometimes moved into denser woods where the trees offer natural windbreaks. Firewood, already gathered in neat piles, is brought closer. Tools are checked again, knives sharpened, snowshoes repaired, sled runners polished. The pace of life narrows. No longer spread out across long summer tasks, families now work together in tight circles, inside the warmth of shared space. Children practice their skills beside elders, learning how to tie knots for snow traps, how to braid sinew into thread, how to handle fire with respect and patience. The stories told now are longer, often stretched across several evenings, with pauses for sleep and dreams. A story may begin one night with a hunter lost in a storm, and finish days later with his safe return, guided by a spirit in the form of a raven. These tales are not just for children, they are for everyone, to remind, to teach, to hold memory in the air like breath on a cold morning. In the north, the Nenettes also settle deeper into their wintering grounds. The reindeer, thick-furred and slow-moving now, are gathered closer each evening and corralled with care. Their presence is not just economic, it is emotional, cultural, spiritual. Their breath warms the camp. Their hooves still echo softly in the snow. The people adjust to shorter days without comment. The sky grows dark by mid-afternoon, and inside the tents, oil lamps are lit with practiced ease. Meals become more regular, slower, frozen fish shaved thin with bone tools, boiled soups thick with marrow, pine tea steeped long and strong. Sleep patterns change too. People rise before the sun and rest again in the middle of the day. Work is done in pulses, not long stretches. Everything is allowed to take its time. Along the coasts, the Chukchi make their final adjustments before the sea becomes impassable. Boats are covered, tied down, and set aside. Nets are cleaned and stored. Salted fish is packed in layers with bark or hide between them to preserve freshness. The ocean, though still present, is no longer a partner for now. It becomes a backdrop, a voice behind the wind, a place to nod toward and remember. Attention turns inward, toward the shaping of tools, the repairing of homes, the weaving of clothing. Children sit beside their mothers or grandmothers, learning how to stitch sealskin into boots, how to fold it properly so it repels water, how to use the right bone needle for each thickness. Their fingers fumble at first, but no one rushes them. Mistakes are part of the lesson. In the forested homes of the Khanty and Mansi, early winter is a time of deep listening. The forest is quieter now, the animals move less, and their tracks are easier to read. Hunters rise early, not to conquer the land, but to learn from it. They look for signs in the snow, the depth of a paw print, the direction of the wind when the snow fell, the way a branch has been brushed aside. These are not details, they are language, and each person who steps into the woods becomes a reader of that silent book. Inside the cabins, work continues softly. Bark containers are sealed, medicines are sorted. People sit close to the fire, not out of necessity alone, but because it feels right. The flames flicker shadows across fur-lined walls, and someone hums a tune with no words. Perhaps it is a song remembered. Perhaps it is one being born in that very moment. Dreams during early winter are often full of snow. Not storms, but white spaces, open ground, landscapes both familiar and strange. A child might dream of walking alone, but feeling no fear. An elder might dream of a fire that speaks. These dreams are not explained. They are simply shared, and in the sharing, they become real. As the world quiets down and the cold begins to press more steadily against the edges of life, the people grow warmer, not just from fire, but from closeness, from rhythm, from trust. And now, as you drift into sleep, imagine that stillness, the snow outside undisturbed, the fire inside glowing low, a coat hanging by the door, ready, a story paused in the middle, waiting patiently for morning to arrive. As the heart of winter settles over the Siberian land, the transformation is complete. The rivers no longer flow. The trees, stripped bare, stand in reverent stillness, their branches heavy with snow that clings like soft silence. The sky, vast and pale, seems to hang lower now, brushing the tops of mountains and forests with a quiet, steady presence. The days are short, the light pale and delicate, and the nights are long, stretching out in velvet darkness, interrupted only by firelight, stars, and the occasional call of an animal passing unseen. This is the season when the world narrows its voice to a whisper, and the indigenous peoples of Siberia listen closely. They do not resist the stillness, they do not rush through the dark. Instead, they lean into it, finding rhythm and comfort in the quiet. Among the Evenki, winter becomes a season of inner knowledge. Outside, the snow crunches softly under careful footsteps as firewood is gathered or traps are checked. Inside, the family gathers close, wrapped in layers of warmth, surrounded by stories etched not in ink, but in memory. Elders sit in their usual places near the fire, shaping bone tools, smoothing leather, threading beads. Their hands move slowly, methodically, guided by decades of repetition. Children sit nearby, watching with wide eyes, copying the movements, asking questions without words. This is how wisdom is passed, not with instructions, but with presence. The fire itself becomes a character in the home. Its pops and crackles mark time. Its glow illuminates faces, furs, and the shapes of sleeping dogs curled at the door. Tea is brewed often. Broth is sipped slowly. No one is in a hurry. The cold outside insists on patience. In the distant tundra, the Nenets remain close to their reindeer, tending to them even as temperatures drop beyond freezing. The herds are watched constantly. Their health and behavior read like a living calendar. If the animals grow restless, if they huddle too tightly, it could mean a storm is coming. If they paw the snow in a certain way, it may be time to move. Decisions are made not through debate, but through observation and trust. Inside the tents, layers of hide and felt block out the worst of the cold. Meals are simple and nourishing. Songs are sung in low tones, more rhythm than melody, more breath than voice. These winter songs are old and often without words. They are meant to be felt, not interpreted. Their tones echo the wind, the heartbeat, the endless snow falling outside. In Chukchi settlements along the ice-covered coastline, the sea is now silent, sealed in white. The people turn inward, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Homes are filled with activity. Clothes are mended, tools reshaped, stories told. And though this season demands stillness, it is not a time of idleness. Every task, no matter how small, carries weight. A well-patched mitten means warm hands during a journey. A carefully carved button might be the difference between comfort and exposure. Even the simple act of sweeping the packed earth floor has meaning. It keeps the space clear, intentional, respected. The Khanty and Mansi in the forest adjust their schedules entirely to winter's demands. Work begins before dawn, guided by lantern light, and pauses midday for food and warmth. The thick snow outside quiets all sound. Even the birds are fewer now, their calls sharp against the otherwise muted world. Yet this silence is not empty. It is full of depth, of thought, of memory. Elders might pause mid-task to tell a story from their youth. A boy might ask what the world looked like before the roads, the wires, the machines. And in the flicker of firelight, the answer comes, not as fact, but as tale, unfolding slowly, warmly, with detail and care. Dreams during this deepest part of winter take on a different quality. They are slower, more vivid. People speak of dreaming in colors they do not see in waking life. Deep reds, soft blues, glowing amber. Dreams are shared in the morning, over steaming tea, and sometimes written into songs or stories to be repeated. They are not analyzed or judged. They are gifts, part of the winter breath, part of the spirit that walks gently through sleeping camps. Outside, the snow falls without sound. It erases footsteps, softens the outlines of sleds, reindeer, and tents. It wraps the world in pause. And yet inside each home, inside each heart, something stirs, something that knows this stillness is not the end, but a moment of preparation, of gathering, of honoring what was and what will be. As you drift now into sleep, imagine that hush, that deep white quiet, the warmth of a fire in a dark room, the flicker of light across fur, the closeness of people who do not need to speak to understand each other. Somewhere far to the north, The stars have returned, and under them, someone sits by the fire, hands wrapped around a warm bowl, eyes half closed, listening to the snowfall and the old stories breathe. The story you've just heard has come to an end. But before we begin our next sleepy journey, if this quiet space has brought you peace tonight, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so you'll always have a calm place to return to. Now, let us continue with the next story in our series of boring history for sleep. Tonight, we gently drift into the sands of ancient Egypt to explore the story of ancient Egyptian funerary texts. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let the past carry you softly into sleep. Far away from the snow-covered lands of the north, beyond the forest and frozen rivers, there exists another ancient world, one of sun-scorched stone, slow-moving rivers, and a civilization that lived in close conversation with both the sky above and the land beneath their feet. Along the Nile, where reeds once swayed and the water reflected the shifting light of Ra, the people of ancient Egypt lived with a profound awareness of time, of life, and most of all, of death. But for them, death was not an end. It was a threshold, a passage, something to be understood, prepared for, and carefully navigated. And to help them cross that mysterious boundary between this world and the next, they wrote, not stories in the way we know them, but sacred words, carefully chosen, meticulously copied, and placed with the dead to protect, guide, and illuminate the journey of the soul. These were the funerary texts of ancient Egypt, words meant to comfort the living and empower the departed, carved into stone, inked onto papyrus, whispered by priests, and treasured for centuries. Tonight, we begin the slow, quiet exploration of those texts, not to memorize them, not to analyze, but simply to sit beside them and let them speak, as softly and patiently as they were once meant to be read. In the earliest days of Egypt's dynastic history, the royal dead were buried with inscriptions carved directly into the walls of their tombs. These were the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings in the world, appearing first in the tomb of King Unas, around 2400 BCE. They were not written for all, only for kings, and their purpose was both protective and transformative. The texts were meant to lift the king from his earthly shell and guide him upward, to the sky, to the stars, to join the company of the gods. The words themselves were like spells designed to open doors, to light the way, to shield against darkness and chaos. O king, one passage reads, you are now a star, lighting the sky with your fire. These texts were written not to entertain, but to ensure. They whispered of reunions with Osiris, of transformation into a falcon or a lotus, of eternal sustenance in the field of reeds. As time passed, the reach of these sacred words began to widen. From the exclusive walls of royal pyramids, funerary texts moved onto coffins, written in black and red ink across the wooden surfaces that now held not kings, but nobles, priests, and commoners. These were the coffin texts, appearing during the Middle Kingdom, around 2100 BCE. The language became more personal. The text spoke in the first person, as if the deceased themselves were speaking. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied. They served as both map and mirror, guiding the soul and reflecting the moral life lived. In many ways, the coffin texts were a democratization of the afterlife. Now, not just kings could journey through the Duat, the mysterious realm of the dead, but anyone who had lived with honor and prepared with care. The text described the geography of the afterlife in symbolic terms: rivers of fire, gates guarded by serpents, fields of grain under an eternal sun. To pass through these places safely, one needed to know the names of gods and demons, to speak the right words at the right time, and to carry with them the essence of truth. By the time of the New Kingdom, beginning around 1550 BCE, funerary writings had become more elaborate, more visual, and more widely used. The most famous of these was the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells, prayers, and illustrations copied onto long rolls of papyrus, sometimes more than 30 feet in length, placed alongside the mummy inside the tomb. The name Book of the Dead is modern. The Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day, a phrase that spoke to their hope of rebirth, of rising again into light after passing through the darkness. These scrolls were highly personalized. Wealthier individuals would commission scribes and artists to create bespoke copies, sometimes including detailed instructions, depictions of trials in the underworld, and images of the soul weighing its heart against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and balance. A light heart meant a free soul. A heavy one brought oblivion. As you lie here now, listening in stillness, imagine those ancient tombs, cool, quiet, carved into cliffs, or hidden beneath sand. Imagine the flicker of torchlight revealing painted scenes of journeys beyond death. Imagine a roll of papyrus, carefully unspooled, each symbol drawn by hand, each word chosen to comfort and guide. The funerary texts of ancient Egypt were not written in fear of death, but in reverence for what lies beyond it. And now, as your breath slows and your thoughts soften, allow yourself to drift across that same river, not hurried, not afraid, only curious, only listening, like one walking gently through a temple at dusk, where the words are still waiting, and the silence is a kind of peace. The Book of the Dead, despite its modern name, was never a single fixed volume. It was not bound or standardized like a contemporary book. Instead, it was a collection of spells, incantations, and prayers, numbered not in pages but in chapters, and even those varied depending on the period, the region, the family, and the preferences of the one commissioning it. Some versions held 120 spells, others 200. Some were richly illustrated with vivid scenes of gods, gates, and underworld landscapes. Others were simpler, consisting only of words written in careful hieroglyphs or the quicker flowing hand of hieratic script. Each papyrus was custom-made, not mass-produced. Each line served a purpose. To understand the Book of the Dead is not to read it linearly, but to feel its rhythm, its weaving of belief and preparation, of myth and morality, of transformation and trust. One of its most famous and profound elements is spell 125, often referred to as the negative confession, or the declaration of innocence. This spell presents the deceased standing before a tribunal of 42 divine judges, each representing a specific principle, crime, or moral code. To pass through this stage of judgment, the soul must declare what it has not done. I have not stolen, I have not slain people, I have not lied, I have not shut my ears to truth. This was not just about declaring innocence. It was about aligning with Ma'at, the fundamental order of the universe. Ma'at was not only a goddess. She was balance, truth, cosmic harmony. Her feather, light and perfect, was placed on one side of the scale, and on the other, the heart of the deceased. If the heart weighed the same or less, the soul could proceed. If it was heavier, burdened by wrongdoing or regret, it was devoured by Ammit, a monstrous being part lion, crocodile, and hippopotamus. To be consumed by Ammit was not eternal torment. It was erasure. It was to cease. And so, the rituals of the Book of the Dead focused not just on survival, but on being remembered, being whole, being ready. The texts also included spells to assist with practical aspects of the afterlife. There were spells to open doors, to avoid snares and ambushes in the underworld, to provide sustenance, to summon air to breathe, and to transform the soul into a bird, a lotus, or a serpent when needed. One could become a swallow who flies freely, or a heron who sees the other shore. These transformations were not whimsical. They reflected the belief that identity was not fixed. A soul was fluid, it could adapt. It could take the form most needed for safety or success in the journey beyond. In some versions, the deceased was guided by Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, who recorded the results of the weighing of the heart. In others, Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead, led the soul by the hand through the many gates and trials. There were guardian deities for each passage, each corner of the underworld, some kind, some fearsome, all requiring knowledge and the proper spell. These gods were not distant figures, but companions, guides, watchers. The journey was perilous, but never walked alone. Among the artifacts found in tombs, we often see these texts wrapped around the body, painted onto the interior of coffins, carved onto statues, or placed in compartments within burial chambers. One such form was the Shabti figurine, a small, often blue-glazed figure intended to act as a servant for the deceased in the afterlife. If the gods called upon the soul to perform labor, the Shabti would answer in its place. Many of these figurines bore inscriptions from the Book of the Dead, tiny yet legible, written with astonishing care. This blending of text, object, and intention was central to Egyptian funerary tradition. Words were not decoration, they were tools, living tools, capable of guiding, protecting, and transforming. Even the placement of the text mattered. A spell written near the head was thought to guide thought, one near the feet to aid travel. To read these texts today is to witness not only a religious system, but an emotional and philosophical one. The Egyptians did not see life and death as opposites, but as parts of one long journey. Death was a mirror, a path, a transformation. The funerary texts were not attempts to escape it, but to walk through it with dignity, courage, and clarity. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine yourself within a quiet tomb, where torchlight flickers across walls etched with symbols and lines. The air is still but not cold. The silence is full but not empty. In one corner lies a scroll, carefully wrapped, its edges worn with age, its words unchanged for thousands of years. These are not simply prayers, they are promises that the night is not the end, that each soul is worthy of guidance, and that even in darkness the words remain, waiting to be read, waiting to carry someone home. Beyond the more well-known spells of the Book of the Dead, the Egyptians developed other funerary texts, more complex, more cosmic in scale, reserved for pharaohs, high priests, and those with deep spiritual authority. These writings, inscribed not on scrolls, but directly onto the walls of royal tombs, hidden deep within the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, represented a different kind of journey. They were not just instructions for reaching the afterlife. They were maps of the underworld itself, diagrams of divine time, sacred geography, and cosmic renewal. One of the earliest of these was the Duat, whose name means that which is in the underworld. This text, appearing first during the reign of Thutmose III in the 18th dynasty, offered a 12-hour depiction of the sun god Ra's nightly journey through the Duat, the unseen realm beneath the earth, filled with caverns, rivers, gates, guardians, and hidden dangers. Unlike the Book of the Dead, which was personal and poetic, the Duat was structured, almost mathematical. Each hour of the night had its own landscape, its own set of deities, its own challenges. The deceased, particularly the king, was meant to identify with Ra, traveling aboard a solar boat through this hidden world, eventually emerging reborn with the sunrise. In the first hours, Ra meets friendly gods who assist him. But as the night deepens, he confronts chaos, symbolized by the serpent Apophis, also called Apep, who attempts to halt the solar bark and plunge the world into eternal night. This battle is not fought with weapons, but with magic, with words, with divine order. Ra is assisted by protective deities who chant spells and strike the snake with glowing knives. And always the journey continues, 1 hour at a time, until, in the 12th hour, the sun is born again from the body of the sky goddess Nut, rising in the east as light returns to the world. The Duat is not just myth. It is philosophy. It expresses a cyclical vision of time, of death and rebirth, where darkness is not evil, but necessary, a place of transformation, not fear. Another great funerary composition, closely related in structure, is the Book of Gates. Also divided into 12 hours of the night, it describes the soul passing through a series of gates, each guarded by a goddess and a gatekeeper. To pass, the soul must name the gate, the goddess, and sometimes perform a spell. The theme here is one of knowledge as power. The soul that remembers, that recites, that understands, is the soul that succeeds. The gates are not physical barriers alone, but symbolic ones, representing the trials of character, truth, and divine alignment. The Book of Gates also offers one of the earliest depictions of humanity, divided into races or nations: Egyptians, Libyans, Asiatics, and Nubians, all passing equally through the gates of the underworld. In this way, the text recognizes that death is a universal journey, and access to rebirth is not limited by nationality, but by purity of heart and strength of spirit. The visual elements of both the Duat and the Book of Gates are stunning. Rows of gods, rivers of fire, serpent-filled caverns, solar boats floating over black waters. These were painted or carved onto tomb walls in vivid colors: deep reds, ochres, blues, and golds. The symmetry and care in each scene were more than artistic. They were spiritual tools. To see these images was to experience part of the journey. To rest in their presence, to sleep beneath them, was to prepare oneself for the same path. And then there is the Book of Caverns. another esoteric text found in royal tombs, focusing on the division of the underworld into caverns or hidden chambers. Unlike the more linear progression of the Duat, the Book of Caverns is introspective, filled with theological reflection on the nature of divine judgment, reward, and punishment. It describes the sun god's encounters with those who have sinned, those who have forgotten Ma'at, and it shows these souls in various states of difficulty. Yet, even here, there is no cruelty, only consequence. The righteous are nourished and protected. The unrighteous are corrected, sometimes through symbolic destruction, but always as part of the balance. These texts reveal how seriously the Egyptians took the continuity between life, death, and what lies beyond. Their underworld was not a place of torture, but a necessary passage, a mirror of this world, but richer, more symbolic, more ordered. In many ways, these writings served not only the dead, but the living. They reminded those still breathing that death was not chaos, but part of the divine cycle. That each night, even the sun itself must journey through shadow to be reborn. And as you drift into stillness now, perhaps you too can feel the rhythm of those sacred hours. The sun sinking into the west, the boat pushing off onto dark waters, the guardians standing at the gates, not to frighten you, but to test your truth. Somewhere beneath painted ceilings, lit by flickering oil lamps, the walls are still whispering, and someone is listening, not with fear, but with understanding. As the tradition of funerary texts continued to evolve in ancient Egypt, so too did the complexity of their vision, moving from the structured mapping of the Duat found in the Duat and Book of Gates into more philosophically layered and abstract texts. Among these were the Book of the Earth, the Book of the Night, and the Book of the Day, all composed during the New Kingdom and appearing most vividly in the tombs of Ramesside pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. These works were no longer simply maps. They were cosmological statements, meditative reflections on time, divine cycles, and the enduring unity between death and rebirth. The Book of the Earth, known in ancient terms as the creation of the sun disk, or the Book of Aker, centers around the earth god Aker and the nightly journey of the sun through the body of the earth. In this cosmology, the Duat is not merely an underworld. It is a sacred interior, a womb within the planet, where the sun is enclosed and renewed. The solar god, once again in the form of Ra, enters the earth's depths, passes through caverns and regions watched over by snake gods, solar deities, and powerful guardians, and emerges in the east as a child born anew. This cycle is not linear. It folds back onto itself, layered and recursive. The deceased, by aligning with the sun god's journey, participates in this cosmic rebirth. The Book of the Earth is striking in its depictions, gods merging, splitting, and coiling through spaces that feel both physical and symbolic. Time is not simply moving forward. It is circling, echoing. The dead are not only judged, but reassembled, reshaped by divine hands. In some tombs, we see the solar disk encased in the arms of Nut, the sky goddess, or riding between two lions who represent the horizons of yesterday and tomorrow. These are not just decorations. They are philosophical expressions of a belief that the soul is always moving, always returning, always carried. Parallel to this is the Book of the Night, which explores the hours of darkness from the perspective of Nut herself. In this text, the night sky is personified. Nut becomes the sky through which the sun must pass after setting. Her body is painted as an arc, her feet in the west, her head in the east, and within her frame, the journey of the sun unfolds once again, but now from an internal, maternal point of view. The sun is swallowed at dusk and reborn at dawn, an image rich in intimacy and ritual repetition. The Book of the Night describes the sun's voyage, passing through her inner body, traveling from hour to hour, guarded by deities and accompanied by boss souls, ram-headed gods, and serpent boats. Here, the passage is not one of combat or judgment, but of nourishment and gestation. The deceased, aligned with the sun, rests within the goddess, safe and unseen, embraced by the night, destined to rise again. Alongside it is the lesser-known Book of the Day, which mirrors the journey through daylight. While less detailed than its nocturnal counterpart, it serves to complete the cycle, emphasizing that the cosmic process does not end with dawn, but continues, endlessly unfolding. These texts were typically painted along the ceilings and walls of tombs, their flow following the curves of the architecture, wrapping the body of the deceased in layers of cosmic significance. As one lay in their final chamber, they were surrounded by the entire cycle of the universe, above, below, to every side, ensuring that even in stillness, their soul remained part of the eternal rhythm. And then there is the Litany of Ra, a funerary composition that blends prayer, invocation, and cosmology into one. It lists 75 names of the sun god Ra, each representing a different aspect of his power and function. In reciting or simply presenting these names, the deceased aligns themselves with every part of Ra's being: his light, his vengeance, his creation, his compassion. This was not just praise, it was identification. By knowing these names, one was not simply remembering Ra, they were becoming him in part. This identification with gods was central to Egyptian funerary belief. To die was to enter the realm of the divine, not as a stranger, but as one who already knew the language, the faces, the rules. The tomb was not a place to hide the dead. It was a temple, a microcosm of the universe, where words, walls, and silence worked together to create continuity between worlds. Tonight, as you lie still beneath your own ceiling, listening in quiet, imagine what it must have felt like to step into those tombs for the last time. To descend through corridors painted with glowing symbols, to see your name written alongside the journey of the gods, to feel not fear, but familiarity, not despair, but design. There was order in these beliefs, and comfort, and the sense that everything, even death, was part of a vast, eternal rhythm. One hour leads to another, one god follows the next, and somewhere beyond the painted stars, the sun waits to rise again. While the funerary texts of ancient Egypt formed the philosophical and spiritual blueprint for the journey beyond death, they were never meant to exist in isolation. They were part of a broader ritual framework, one that extended into physical preparation, sacred performance, and the involvement of many individuals whose roles were carefully defined and deeply respected. To understand these texts fully is to understand the context in which they were used, from the moment of death to the final sealing of the tomb. When a person of importance passed away, preparations began immediately. The body was not merely disposed of, but transformed, made ready for its eternal life. This required the expertise of embalmers, known in ancient Egyptian as wetu, who worked under the guidance of high priests and ritualists. Their workspace was not a public place, but a sacred field, often referred to as the house of purification or the place of embalming. There, over a period of 70 days, the deceased was washed, dried, and wrapped according to precise rules. During this time, funerary texts were not yet activated, but their presence loomed. The embalmers were preparing a vessel for the soul to inhabit beyond the veil, and everything from the placement of amulets to the direction the body faced was chosen to match the cosmological teachings embedded in the texts. For royalty and nobility, this was a particularly elaborate affair. Golden masks, beaded wrappings, and richly painted coffins were common, but more importantly, texts were written on the inner walls of coffins, known as coffin texts, which evolved from earlier pyramid texts. These writings offered protection, guidance, and reassurance to the soul as it lay in darkness, preparing for its journey. The moment of burial itself was more than symbolic. It was performative. Priests acting in specific roles reenacted divine myths as part of the send-off. One of the most significant rituals was the opening of the mouth ceremony, a symbolic rite wherein the deceased's mouth, nose, and eyes were touched with sacred instruments to restore their senses in the afterlife. The ritual drew on the myth of Osiris, the god of the dead, who had been reassembled and reanimated by his sister wife Isis. By performing this rite, the deceased was linked to Osiris, the eternal king who had passed through death and returned. Funerary texts were often read aloud or invoked silently by priests during this ritual, reinforcing the magical power of the written word with the living breath of ritual speech. These texts were not passive, they were spoken into being, made alive in the very moment they were needed. The tomb itself functioned as more than a place of rest. It was a house of eternity, purge, filled with items chosen not for their earthly utility, but their eternal symbolism. Bowls, combs, tools, and miniature models of farms or ships were placed within to ensure the deceased had everything they needed in the afterlife. But alongside these objects were scrolls, rolled papyri of the Book of the Dead, tucked into recesses or placed within wooden statues. In some cases, entire walls were painted with selections from funerary texts. These texts were not chosen randomly. They were curated by scribes who specialized in religious texts, who understood which spells corresponded to which challenges. Spell 17 might describe the gods of the sun's bark. Spell 30 might instruct the heart not to betray its owner during judgment. Every inclusion had a purpose. The richer the person, the more spells could be included. But it was not just wealth, it was belief. Families saved for years to afford even a single papyrus sheet with a few vital spells. For them, these texts were not luxury, they were lifelines. Priests, too, played a critical role long after burial. In the days, months, and years that followed, they performed rituals at the tomb, offering bread, beer, incense, and spoken words to nourish the ka, or vital essence of the deceased. These rites were guided again by written texts, some found in temple libraries, others memorized through years of training. Even the act of remembrance was structured. Names were recited to preserve memory. Statues were touched to reawaken presence. The line between living and dead remained thin, bridged by text, ritual, and belief. As you drift deeper into this quiet space tonight, imagine the final hours of an Egyptian burial procession. The mourners walk in slow rhythm through the desert, following the priest who carries a scroll, chanting words from the Book of the Dead. The tomb stands ahead, carved into the limestone, cool and still. The walls glow with ochre and gold. The spells have already been written, the statues already placed, and now the words must be spoken. Quietly, reverently, each spell is read. Not as fiction, not as poetry, but as a map, a contract, a promise. That death is not the end, that the path has been prepared, and that the words, old as the stars, still hold power, soft, steady, and unbroken. Long after the body was laid to rest, the role of the living in the Egyptian funerary tradition remained crucial. In fact, it was the continuing relationship between the dead and their surviving loved ones that gave many funerary texts their enduring power. Ancient Egyptians did not view death as a severance, but as a transition into another phase of existence, one that required support, remembrance, and ritual maintenance from those still walking under the sun. Families of the deceased, particularly those from wealthier classes, often employed or trained priests known as servants, whose sole duty was to regularly visit the tomb, make offerings, recite sacred passages, and maintain the proper spiritual conditions to ensure that the ka, the vital essence or spiritual double, was fed and content. These rituals were not only gestures of love, but acts of spiritual necessity. The belief was clear. If the ka was neglected, the deceased might suffer in the afterlife, becoming restless or forgotten. To prevent such a fate, funerary texts often included explicit instructions for the living, inscribed directly onto stelae, walls, or offering tables. These instructions might read as petitions. O living ones who pass by this tomb, speak my name, pour water for me, and I will bless you. They were humble requests for remembrance and powerful affirmations of the ancient Egyptian understanding that spoken words had spiritual weight. Even a passerby, simply whispering a name aloud, could offer nourishment to the dead. This was not superstition, it was theology embedded in everyday life. Over time, this theology gave rise to entire genres of funerary writing devoted to protecting and empowering the dead long after burial. Texts such as the Letters to the Dead were written by family members who sought assistance, guidance, or forgiveness from deceased loved ones. These letters might ask the dead to intercede with gods on the family's behalf, to heal an illness, or to explain troubling dreams. They were buried in tombs or placed at shrines, bridging the invisible gap between the two worlds. Funerary texts also began to incorporate protective spells, not just against cosmic dangers in the underworld, but against earthly threats, such as tomb robbers, natural disasters, or enemies who might attempt to erase one's name. These spells called upon guardian deities, lion-headed goddesses, serpent-bodied protectors, falcon-winged spirits, to encircle the tomb with unseen power. Some texts included threats to potential desecrators, warning that divine retribution would fall upon anyone who disturbed the peace of the deceased. The tomb thus became not only a resting place, but a fortified spiritual fortress. Even architectural features of tombs began to reflect this dual purpose, beauty and protection. false doors were carved into walls, believed to be portals through which the Ka could move between the worlds. Shaft tombs and hidden chambers became more complex, confusing potential intruders while symbolizing the layered mystery of the afterlife. These changes were mirrored in the evolution of the funerary texts themselves, which grew increasingly elaborate. As dynasties passed and the religious landscape shifted, new texts such as the Book of Breathing emerged, distilling older ideas into more compact and accessible forms. These were especially popular during the late period, when more individuals across different social classes began to seek spiritual security through writing. The Book of Breathing, for instance, was often included in the coffins of non-royal individuals and emphasized the continued breath and life force of the soul, an echo of earlier themes, adapted for a new audience. Through all of this, the thread remained the same: the belief that the written word, when crafted with care and read with reverence, could bridge the mortal and the eternal. Today, many of these ancient texts survive in fragments, scattered in museums, stored in climate-controlled archives, or etched faintly into stone walls, fading under centuries of wind. Scholars study them not only for linguistic data, but for insight into a worldview that refused to treat death as defeat. And now, thousands of years later, those same words reach across time. As you listen, in this quiet hour, you are part of that chain, a living witness to a sacred memory, a silent reader of prayers that once guided souls through sacred gates. Somewhere in the distance, across deserts and centuries, a tomb still holds its breath. A name waits to be spoken, and the text carved in ochre and ink whispers softly, asking not to be forgotten, not to be silenced, but to be heard once more in the stillness of the night. As we continue to explore the legacy of ancient Egyptian funerary texts, it becomes increasingly clear that their influence extends far beyond tomb walls and sacred scrolls. These writings, shaped by centuries of belief, storytelling, and ritual, planted deep roots in the human imagination. And although the civilization that created them has long since faded into the sand, their echoes remain, resonating quietly through modern thought, religious tradition, and cultural symbolism. One of the most enduring legacies of these texts lies in their treatment of the soul and its journey. In ancient Egypt, the soul was not a single entity, but a constellation of aspects: the Ka, the Ba, the Ah, the Ren, and the Shut. Each of these carried different roles and meanings, the Ka representing vital energy or spiritual double, the Ba a person's personality or mobile spirit, the Ache a transfigured form of the soul made divine, the Ren being the name, and the Shut the shadow. This multi-part concept of the soul, outlined in the funerary texts, influenced later mystical systems. In Greek and Roman interpretations of the Egyptian afterlife, seen in Hermetic writings or through the lens of early Neoplatonism, there is a recognition of the soul's layered nature. The idea that identity survives death and that names have power appears in Gnostic texts, Hebrew mystical traditions, and even early Christian theology. These echoes are not coincidences. Through trade, conquest, and translation, Egyptian spiritual philosophy seeped into the classical world. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described Egyptian burial customs with a tone of wonder and respect, noting that no other people were so concerned with the fate of the soul. Over time, these ideas blended into broader Mediterranean spiritual currents. The concept of judgment after death, for instance, wherein a person's deeds are weighed to determine their fate, bears strong resemblance to the weighing of the heart ceremony depicted in the Book of the Dead. In this scene, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, places the deceased's heart on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the principle of truth and cosmic balance. If the heart is heavier, it is devoured by the monster Ammit. If lighter, the soul may proceed toward a blessed afterlife. Variations of this motif would later appear in Christian, Islamic, and Zoroastrian eschatology. Beyond theology, the visual language of the funerary texts, their use of stylized gods, magical inscriptions, and symbolic geography, shaped art and architecture throughout history. In Renaissance Europe, travelers who visited Egypt returned with stories of mysterious symbols, lost languages, and monumental tombs lined with strange writings. These early encounters stirred the European imagination, leading to the emergence of Egyptomania during the 18th and 19th centuries. Tomb paintings and funerary scrolls were collected, studied, and copied, influencing everything from literature to decorative arts. Obelisks were raised in Paris, London, and New York. Sphinxes adorned bridges and gardens. Egyptian hieroglyphs appeared in arcane books and secret societies, their meanings half remembered but always imbued with mystery. In more recent centuries, the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone by Jean-François Champollion in the 1820s unlocked the long-lost meaning of hieroglyphs, allowing scholars to read the funerary texts in their original form for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. This breakthrough led to a renaissance of Egyptology, and with it, a renewed understanding of the complexity and beauty of these ancient writings. Today, museums around the world display fragments of the Book of the Dead, carefully unfurled in glass cases, while digital platforms offer translations and reconstructions of entire tombs once hidden beneath desert rock. The texts, once meant to guide a single soul into the afterlife, now guide millions into a deeper appreciation of humanity's spiritual history. They invite us to ask the same questions the ancients asked. What happens when we die? What do we leave behind? What is the purpose of remembering? And in these quiet questions, often asked in solitude, we find ourselves walking beside those long-gone Egyptians, readers of the same lines, dreamers of the same beyond. As you lie in stillness tonight, eyes closed, mind adrift, you too are part of this lineage. Not as a pharaoh or a priest, but as a listener, a keeper of memory, a witness to the sacred bond between word and spirit. The stars may have shifted, the desert winds may have buried cities, but the texts remain. And so do we, ever searching, ever wondering, ever listening for the quiet voices of the past, whispering their truths into the silence of night. To understand how ancient Egyptian funerary texts managed to survive for millennia, one must look not only at their content, but at the materials and writing systems used to transmit them. These sacred texts were not simply whispered or memorized. They were inscribed, painted, etched, and carefully recorded using one of the most intricate writing systems ever developed, hieroglyphs. The word hieroglyph comes from the Greek for sacred carvings, and in the case of funerary literature, that name could not be more fitting. Each symbol was more than a letter. It was an image with spiritual weight. A bird could represent both sound and soul. A feather could mean truth or a specific consonant. A coiled rope could symbolize eternity. When scribes set pen to papyrus or chisel to stone, they were not just writing, they were conjuring. The act of inscribing a funerary spell was a ritual in itself, a transmission of divine language. The tools they used were simple yet precise. Brushes made from rush reeds, inks crafted from carbon black or red ochre mixed with water and gum, and papyrus sheets rolled from the pith of the papyrus plant, flattened and dried under pressure. These papyrus scrolls could stretch for meters, some containing hundreds of lines of continuous text, interwoven with colored vignettes that illustrated key moments in the soul's journey. The quality of the papyrus varied depending on the wealth of the deceased, as did the skill of the scribe. For royalty, the scrolls were grand, highly decorated, and illuminated with blues, golds, and deep reds. For commoners, the scrolls might be shorter, monochrome, or even shared among family members. But regardless of status, the purpose remained: to preserve sacred words for eternity. Stone was used for permanence. Tomb walls bore carvings of spells and prayers, sometimes in relief, sometimes painted. These inscriptions served two purposes. They protected the tomb from spiritual and physical intrusion, and they ensured that even if the papyrus rotted or was stolen, the words would remain, etched into the architecture of the eternal house. Interestingly, not all funerary texts were written in the same script. While hieroglyphs were used in formal sacred inscriptions, especially in temples and royal tombs, a more cursive form of writing known as hieratic was used for everyday religious documents. Hieratic allowed scribes to write more quickly and efficiently, particularly on papyrus, and was often used for books of the dead and other funerary papyri. Over time, yet another script called demotic emerged, a shorthand that further simplified the writing of sacred and administrative texts. These different scripts represent layers of access. While hieroglyphs were the domain of elite artisans and priests, hieratic and demotic made it possible for broader sections of the literate population to engage with funerary writing. Still, literacy was limited. Most ancient Egyptians could not read or write, and so the role of the scribe became vital. Scribes were trained from a young age in temple schools, memorizing hundreds of symbols and the many meanings they could carry. They did not simply copy text. They interpreted, adapted, and selected spells appropriate for each burial. The process of creating a funerary scroll was collaborative. A family might commission a scribe to craft a personal version of the Book of the Dead. This scribe would discuss the wishes of the deceased or their relatives, choose spells relevant to the individual's spiritual needs, and determine the appropriate layout of text and image. Sometimes, blanks were left for names to be filled in later, standardized texts that became personal upon completion. These customizable books served the spiritual economy of ancient Egypt and reflect a belief that salvation could be achieved through both tradition and intention. One particularly striking detail is how the illustrations, known as vignettes, functioned alongside text. A scene showing the weighing of the heart might accompany spell 125. A boat crossing the underworld might appear beside a travel invocation. These images were not decorative. They were magical. To see them was to activate them. For the Egyptians, seeing was believing, and believing was power. Even the layout of a tomb reflected textual logic. Walls were arranged like open books, read from left to right or top to bottom, guiding the soul's eye through a spiritual narrative. These visual and written cues transformed tombs into sacred libraries, where each wall became a page in the book of eternal life. And so, night after night, century after century, these texts sat in the dark, waiting for a beam of torchlight, a whisper of a visitor, a scholar's gaze, or now, your listening breath. As you lie in your own quiet chamber, eyes heavy, breath slow, remember this. The scribes wrote for you too, not by name, but by spirit. For all who sleep, for all who pass into silence, for all who seek peace beyond the world of noise. The ink has faded, the stone has cracked, but the words, those ancient words, still hold, still wait, still speak. In the intricate belief system of ancient Egypt, funerary texts did more than instruct. They created a sacred theater in which gods and mortals played out one of the most profound dramas in human imagination: the journey of the soul through the underworld, known as the Duat. The Duat was not simply a gloomy land of shadows, but a complex and symbolic realm of rivers, caverns, gates, fire lakes, guardian beasts, and celestial boats. It was a world where light and darkness battled for dominance, where time folded and stretched in ways that defied human logic, and where the soul of the deceased had to prove its worth before being allowed to join the eternal stars. At the heart of these journeys stood a rich pantheon of gods, each embodying a force, a law, or an obstacle. The funerary texts, whether carved into tomb walls, painted on papyri, or inscribed on coffins, acted as both map and manual, offering the soul magical tools, passwords, and stories to survive the perils of the night. Osiris, the lord of the underworld, was perhaps the most central figure in this narrative. Once a living god-king, Osiris was murdered by his jealous brother Set, dismembered and scattered. Through the devotion of his wife's sister Isis, he was reassembled, resurrected, and given dominion over the land of the dead. His story, retold endlessly in funerary texts, became a template for all human souls to die, to be judged, and to be reborn in a higher realm. Osiris sat in judgment, and to stand before him, the deceased needed both purity and preparation. Thus came the spells, hundreds of them, each one a step, a shield, a plea, or a weapon. Some spells turned the soul into animals, allowing it to fly as a hawk, swim as a fish, or slither past obstacles as a snake. Others opened locked gates, calmed guardians, or invoked the power of protective gods. The journey was not linear. The soul passed through the 12 hours of night, a sequence of gates guarded by terrifying beings, each hour more treacherous than the last. The dead were ferried through on the solar bark, the great boat of Ra, who journeyed with them, fighting chaos serpents and breathing light into darkness. The presence of Ra, the sun god, reveals another layer of belief, that the sun's daily disappearance and reappearance mirrored the soul's own cycle of death and rebirth. Ra died each night and was reborn at dawn, just as the soul hoped to emerge transformed at the end of its journey. The Duat, one of the older funerary texts, described this journey hour by hour, complete with depictions of each gate, each guardian, and each transformation. Later texts like the Book of Gates and Book of Caverns expanded on this vision, emphasizing not just the obstacles of the Duat, but its moral geometry, how the soul had to align with Ma'at, the cosmic order, to pass unharmed. Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and justice, was not just an idea, it was a deity, often depicted as a woman with a feather in her hair. The final judgment, so central to Egyptian funerary texts, revolved around this feather. The heart of the deceased, believed to contain memory, conscience, and emotion, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. A heart heavy with sin would betray its owner. But if the scales balanced, the soul could pass into the field of reeds, a serene and fertile version of Egypt itself, where the dead lived forever in peace, tending crops, embracing loved ones, and watching the river flow under a golden sky. The funerary text spoke of this judgment with both fear and hope. Some texts included a negative confession, a long list of sins the deceased claimed not to have committed. I have not lied, I have not stolen, I have not killed. It was less a denial and more a declaration of aspiration, a way to remind the soul of its ideals and encourage the God's mercy. Surrounding all of this was the profound belief that words had power. To speak a spell was to enact it. To name a god was to summon a presence. To read a map of the underworld was to walk it, in spirit if not in body. The texts served as living companions, a kind of spiritual armor worn by the soul, and they worked best when remembered, recited, and believed. As you lie still tonight, your body sinking deeper into rest, imagine for a moment that you are aboard a slow-moving solar boat. Stars gleam above, and shadowy gates loom ahead. But you are not afraid. The gods are beside you. The spells are in your hands. The Duat stretches wide, but it is not endless. The light waits on the other side, and you, silent traveler, are ready to pass through. As the long and winding journey through the Duat reaches its close, ancient Egyptian funerary texts lead the soul toward its final destination, the field of reeds, known in Egyptian as the Aru. Unlike the underworlds of many other ancient religions, filled with gloom and despair, the field of reeds was envisioned as a paradise of still waters, gentle winds, endless harvests, and joyful reunions. It was not a place of shadows, but a perfected mirror of earthly life, where all suffering had ceased, and peace stretched out like the fertile Nile floodplain under a forever blue sky. The Book of the Dead and its predecessors described the field of reeds in soft and glowing detail. Here, the soul was reunited with loved ones, worked lands that yielded abundance without effort, and walked freely beneath palm trees, papyrus groves, and the soft gaze of the gods. The deceased might even retain their favorite pets, possessions, or servants, spiritually summoned by spells and figurines left in their tombs. In this serene world, time had no weight, and the seasons never withered. It was not eternal idleness, but an eternal equilibrium, a balance where joy and duty lived side by side. The soul could plant and reap, build and rest, celebrate and contemplate. And unlike the chaotic perils of the Duat, the field of reeds required no defenses, only worthiness and memory. For the soul to remain in this blessed realm, it had to remember who it was. Names held power in ancient Egypt, not only as identifiers, but as anchors to identity. This is why the deceased's name was repeated in funerary texts, inscribed on tomb walls, coffins, and statues. To forget a name was to erase a soul from eternity. Conversely, to speak a name aloud, generation after generation, was to breathe life into the past. Thus, funerary texts became vessels of remembrance, not just maps to the afterlife, but tools of immortality. As centuries passed, the field of reeds took on symbolic meaning even among the living. It represented the ideal state of being, in harmony with Ma'at, free from injustice, close to the gods, and untouched by the corruption of time. It was not merely an afterlife, it was a goal, a spiritual North Star, a vision of how the world could be, should be, would be, if the soul were honest and the heart light. In some versions of the Book of the Dead, the deceased had to pass through a final series of declarations and gates, even upon entering Aru. These last steps ensured that the soul did not carry corruption into a place of peace. Only when the final word was spoken, the final truth accepted, and the final gate opened, could the spirit dissolve into the landscape of eternity. No longer a traveler, now a resident. This final act completed the great arc of Egyptian spiritual life, from birth to death to rebirth, not in the form of a new life on earth, but as a permanent place among the stars and reeds. It was a theology built not on fear, but on preparation, not on randomness, but on ritual, and not on forgetting death, but understanding it as a continuation. For the ancient Egyptians, funerary texts were never just about the end. They were about what comes after, about ensuring that the end was not a fall into darkness, but a rise into light. And in this way, these texts, written with ink and fire and prayer, became eternal companions. Even now they live. They live in museums, in scrolls behind glass, in academic translations, in whispered invocations by those who study the old ways. And perhaps most of all, they live in your imagination, in this quiet moment, as your breath softens and your eyelids grow heavy. Perhaps tonight, in your sleep, you'll find yourself standing by a river lined with golden reeds. The air is soft, the sky glows with the light of early morning. There is a path before you, winding through fields of calm. No one is chasing you, nothing is missing. You remember your name, you remember peace, and as the dream deepens, so does the silence, so does the stillness. You are no longer journeying, you have arrived. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I hope this quiet journey helped you find rest tonight. When you wake, may your day be filled with calm energy, gentle luck, and small, beautiful surprises. Until next time, sleep well, take care, and I'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night.